He's making it seem as though the article that I was referencing, the article that I was reading, as a matter of fact, in terms of China's re-education and cultural erasure has ended, and that Xinjiang has now become a tourism destination. He claims that that article does not exist, except here is the article.
Okay, let's take a look at this article. There is no doubt about who rules, and evidence of the terror of the last 4 years is everywhere. It's seen in Xinjiang cities where many historic centers have been bulldozed and the Islamic call to prayer no longer rings out. It's seen in Kashgar, where one mosque was converted into a cafe and a section of another has been turned into a tourist toilet. Is he citing this article as evidence that, oh, well, China got their act together? Because this article describes basically like a dystopian nightmare. Doesn't sound great. To represent that article as though it is painting a rosy picture of what is going on in that region is so dishonest.
Once again, I don't see the organ harvesting or the execution camps that
Okay, so the Omni drama that just never seems to end, you guys. I don't know when this is going to end, but the Hasan Ethan stuff has just been a content machine for the last like 3 weeks straight. Just a relentless salvo of content. Hasan finally reacted to Ethan's content cop. It finally happened. I think he's continuing to do so today. I think over the course of, how long is this? 9 hours of reacting? I think he only got through like 45 minutes, bro. I think he only got through like 45 minutes of the video in like 9 hours. So we may have to pick and choose like what spots we tune into.
Prologue. Why am I making this?
Oh, hi there.
That's me. He's watching me play Marvel Rivals in the background. Okay,
me,
cool.
Your old friend, Ethan Klein. It's been
Is Marvel Rivals BDS? Marvel Rivals is not on the BDS list. Okay.
a while since we've last spoken. In that time, I've had 3 kids.
Not the BDSM list, you f***ing perverts. What is wrong with you guys?
All boys. I've lost 100 pounds. And I've pissed off 75% of the internet. Probably a lot of you guys, too. Actually talking about there at the NRA meeting that's today in Texas. Someone should bomb. Oh, yeah, and I got a tattoo also, so I'm cool like that now. Left or right, I always thought that, despite our differences, there was one thing we could all agree on. And what was that? That we love America and everything she stands for.
Mom and Dad and apple pie.
Sure, there's plenty to criticize and endless things to improve, but I thought it was about making a more perfect union, not tearing it down.
And marching bands, a pride that only
The thing is, there's something kind of scary brewing in America. Communism.
That's America.
I think you can broaden the term and say illiberalism. That's what's going on. That's alarming, and it is alarming. But it's not just communists. There's a virulent anti or illiberal strain that seems to be growing, picking up momentum, and this is not a great sign for the future. Our society can't exist if we don't have a shared understanding of like our institutions, the rule of law, et cetera, et cetera. It's a recipe for something pretty corrosive, incendiary. There are like 12 communists on Twitter. Just let them be. I wish there was just 12. I do suspect it's a little bit more than 12. Karatatat, thank you so much for the primer.
That's America to me.
I started a show a couple of years ago with my acquaintance, Hasan Piker. You might remember him from...
Yeah, by the way, I do want to point out something here. This is January 31st, 2025 was when this video was released. January 31st, 2025. Yeah, I disliked it.
Okay.
I ripped it already. Gotta do it for the one time.
Oh, did he pre-watch? Oh my God.
There was something brewing in the United States of America at that point. Do you want to know why I say this? I point out the date. Because the thing that was brewing in America was not communism. I know he's trying to make a joke, right? He's, I think, trying to make a joke. But we were already deep into the insanity of the Donald Trump Burger Reich administration.
The Hasan doctrine that you can only focus on one thing at a time. That seems to be the Hasan doctrine. Whatever the omni cause is for that day, you can you have to exclusively focus all of your energy, attention, and content on that one thing. And if you divert from that one thing, it means that you don't care about the other things. That's his doctrine. I don't know if we're going to do 1.5. We can do 1.25 here.
At this point, I was in Japan, escaping the fascist administration rising to power. But at this point, it had been 11 days since Elon Musk had dropped the Sig Heil twice at inauguration.
Wait, I know I've seen clips of Ethan talking about the Sig Heil. Like, it's not like he didn't talk about that.
Okay. We're 11 days into Donald Trump. And the reason why I point this out is because I suspect, regardless of the fact that I didn't watch Context Nuke, but I am very familiar with Ethan's commentary on the matter. The reason why I mention this is because Ethan has a lot of issues with figuring out his priorities, because a lot of what Ethan talks about in this video are values that he cares about, values that he wants to defend. Like, he's a fighter against anti-Semitism. He's a fighter against like right-wing attitudes and things like that. He's a fighter against extremism on all sides. And yet, it feels like what he chooses to spend his time on,
oh my God,
betrays that idea.
Give me a break. What do you think is a more existential threat to the human species? Okay, the conflict in Gaza or global warming? You know, the conflict in Gaza is horrifying and the death toll is immense and sobering. But the prospect of climate change without proper intervention now could result in the annihilation of billions of people. And yet, Hasan chooses to spend most of his time talking about Gaza. So I guess this means that Hasan doesn't care about global warming. I guess if we're playing that reasoning out to its logical conclusion, I guess Hasan just doesn't care about global warming. That's what he's saying here. You can't focus on two things at the same time. You can never talk about what is deemed to be the most important issue of that particular day by, the purity testers on the left. And if you diverge from whatever the chosen topic is for that day, it means that you're disingenuous and you don't care about important issues. That's the logic here, and it's so stupid.
Betrays that value, that first principle that he's operating off of. Because if you're freaking out about anti-Semitism on the rise, I would assume that you probably wouldn't make an entire video and use your previously unused platform to attack your former podcast co-host, who you knew was not an anti-Semite, and you, I think, still know is not an anti-Semite, but sometimes you go back and forth on it.
I don't know, man. I feel like Ethan convinced me a little bit during their exchange that Hasan, at minimum, I think you could say, is fully guilty of anti-Jewish microaggressions.
And I know his response always is he can care about two things at once. Yes, but the thing that he's caring about is bullshit. And I think my response to this is going to explain to you exactly why the thing that he ostensibly cares about with respect to me, okay,
T15 is better. Appreciate it, buddy.
or all the other people that he brings up in this Context Nuke, is ridiculous. Especially because,
yeah, in about 1.3 billion years, the sun will expand to such a degree that it will literally swallow the Earth whole. It will annihilate Earth. That's going to happen in about 1.3 billion years. The fact that Hasan is not regularly talking about the importance of interplanetary colonization when we face full-on extinction on this planet, I think is frankly disgusting. The only conclusion that I can reach because of his inaction or his lack of commentary about our planetary extinction, our inevitable planetary extinction, the only conclusion that I can jump to is that he doesn't care about human beings. Hasan is racist against human beings, is what I'm saying. Bell comment, thank you so much for $2 Canadian. Hasan is lying. Ethan did use his platform.
whenever Ethan says, I can care about two things at once,
yeah,
well, he certainly doesn't talk about the other thing that he's supposed to care about.
Well, I'm pretty sure he did talk about
Ethan
the
says, I care about the side, for
Trump
example,
administration.
and then spends every waking moment talking about those who speak out against said side, then it's kind of hard for people to...
Does he spend every waking moment talking about like the Hasan stuff? It's a lot lately, but I've seen plenty of clips of Ethan talking about Trump. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've seen those clips.
go along with this ridiculous narrative that he actually cares about the side.
Such classics as
America deserved 9/11, dude. F- it. I'm saying it.
Yeah, kill them. Kill those motherfuckers in a video game. Sorry. Holy shit. That's not what I said. You dumb cracker bitch.
and of course, the Leftovers podcast, which was our show, which we made broadly to goof on the antics of the right. Now, to be clear, I knew about all these edgy and controversial jokes at the time we made the show together, because who am I to judge?
There was Ethan Klein being a delightful human being.
I was just going to say, if there's another Holocaust, if they start rounding up the Jews again, I hope Ben gets...
Okay, the Seinfeld references are stale, man. But that's an aesthetic note.
He presents himself as someone like me, a left-leaning Democrat who supports basic things. And we went on making the show.
Okay, right off the rip, let me get started by saying...
This, I think, is valid critique. This, I think, is absolutely valid critique of Ethan. Because him saying that, I think that indicates that he didn't really do a lot of due diligence looking into what Hasan says, because it's not like Hasan has not been very outwardly facing what you might call like radical leftists at least that's how he presents himself. I would have to disagree with you, Devs. I don't think that Hasan hides it well. It's like the Pod Save guys. I feel like the Pod Save guys didn't really know a lot about about Hasan's content. I'm not sure that the Pod Save guys are aware that Hasan is like, he literally hates liberals and wants sees the means of production style revolution. But for Ethan to say that Hasan presented himself as a liberal Democrat, well, I mean, how much of his stuff did you watch? Right?
I have failed. I'm a failure. The reason why I failed is because the Leftovers podcast was supposed to be a podcast where this man, who I thought at the time was an open-minded, empathetic, kind person, who was interested in learning, was on his own journey of learning, was supposed to be the goofs and gaps guy, and I was supposed to be the guy that gives them, the meat and the bones. I was supposed to be the information guy. He's the goofs and gaps guy. We clown on the right, and we educate the audience as Ethan himself is getting educated by politics. But it seems like I failed on that educational aspect, considering that his analysis right off the rip is, well, he's a left-leaning Democrat who supports basic things. What does this mean?
What
does this mean?
Supports basic things. And
left-leaning Democrat who supports basic things? Okay.
we went on making the show for about 2 years and everything was good. Everyone was having fun. The audience was having fun. No problem. That was until this happened.
We were doing our regular show, and for the first time I noticed an inordinate amount of radical, hardcore leftists. I mean, I thought we were social democrats, not whatever this was.
Ethan Klein did not know what social democrats are or what that represents, by the way, before Leftovers. And I suspect he might still not know what being a social democrat is, even at this point. But let's continue.
I don't
really understand the relevance of, like, he didn't know a thing before and now he knows a thing. Like, okay. I mean, you just said a moment ago that the purpose of the podcast was education, and now you're like, huh, he didn't know this thing before.
hate the idea of like people who can be successful. I think it's good that people can achieve success in the term monetary success. I mean, that's what that means, right? I do. There's nothing.
I am not a hater of success. I myself am financially very successful. One of the largest points of contention with my existence from many right-wingers is that, oh, you're a socialist, but you have money.
Not just right-wingers, let me tell you.
How does that happen? So clearly, I don't take issue with that. There is no disagreement there.
Nothing wrong with that.
Because I see so many people in the chat saying no.
Does space work for it does. Okay.
About like what the f do you
What
want?
is the idea that
you guys,
people
like,
are
just-
looking for?
You guys are all like radical communists. There's that many radical communists. Suck it, chat. You're watching a capitalist pig. Deal with it.
And then this happened.
This comment from Hasan really started to sound some alarms in my head.
If you're in a socialist country with multiple parties, and one of the parties is a capitalist
Is this the
party,
re-education camps thing?
Yeah.
What would you do if that party started gaining momentum?
The solution to that would always be education and offering more
Re-education?
re-education, certainly. Yeah.
He's saying in a socialist structure, economic and government structure, which is not technically incompatible with democracy, as long as it's truly democratic. and you have a socialist structure, and then you have a group of capitalists that are gaining popularity. You have a group of people that form a political party within your socialist structure, and they advocate for opening up the economy to liberalize the economy and, you know, embrace free markets and embrace capitalism. And then that group of people starts to gain popularity and starts to pose a legitimate threat to the socialist structure. What is Hasan's remedy for this? Education. Okay, well, what's the enforcement mechanism? What do you mean education? Are you saying all of these people are going to voluntarily go to like a community center where they will be taught about the glory of, you know, communism? So right away, the show, I mean, when I was talking about it earlier, and I talked about it's not necessarily like communists versus, you know, liberals or fascists versus liberals. It's illiberals versus liberals. Right away, his immediate solution to a possible capitalist democratic victory over within a socialist structure that could potentially reform the entire structure. Right away, his remedy is illiberal. Let's just force people to forcefully re-educate them.
There should be an enforcement mechanism.
What is that?
Education. Here, I'll give you an example.
No, education is not the enforcement mechanism. Education is the remedy. What is your enforcement mechanism is the question, which is, you know, I think we all know what he means.
What to do with the right-wing charlatans who are anti-vaxxers and unimaginably racist? I am a firm and committed believer in rehabilitation. And because I am a firm and committed believer in rehabilitation,
what does this even mean?
I believe everyone can be rehabilitated, including right-wing reactionaries.
What does this mean, though? Should we round up right-wing reactionaries and throw them in institutions and re-educate them? Is that what the solution is here?
So if you can understand that from the perspective of like getting your parents who are brain broken by insane right-wing sentiment coming back to reality through the process of education, then you can understand exactly what I'm talking about. The problem is this is red baiting to be like, ooh, this is red terror. He wants to do re-education. Now, of course, many of the conversations that we had.
Well, I wish he would just like specifically say like, what does your education look like? What does that look like in practice? And if he went into it, then the whole red scaring thing would be justified.
As friends and podcast co-hosts at this point are now being utilized in a nefarious way to say, ooh, he really scared me with this one. Let's take a look.
And in that enforcement mechanism, I think like rehabilitation, which would include re-education as well.
If putting capitalists in re-education camps,
so I guess physically detaining them and putting them in camps. He is just advocating for re-education camps. He is just unironically advocating for re-education camps.
Isn't disturbing enough.
This is, again, very scary. It does not mean, he said capitalist on horribly racist. No, my point is you can understand the importance of education in that regard, right? Because a capitalist is not going to gain incredible amounts of momentum, but a capitalist might actually do crimes in the process. And if that happens, then yes, education and rehabilitation.
What? Can we just unpack what he just said there? Now he's weaseling out of his original position, which is round them up and throw them in re-education camps. Now he's altering that. He's trying to sanitize it a little bit by saying if the capitalists commit some kind of crime in the pursuit of their, you know, democratic project to bring about capitalism, then you throw them in institutions and re-educate them, which is not what he said before. Like, I just really wish he would just like full-throatedly own the stuff that he says. Like, just say what you have to say. Just like tell people what you actually believe. He is obviously squirming out of his previous advocacy for just throwing people in camps. Oh, if they incidentally, in their advocacy for capitalism, commit a crime, then you have a justifiable pretense to institutionalize them. And then when you do, you can re-educate them there. That's not what he said before. He's just lying here.
Is absolutely a necessity. It is a far more preferable outcome than actually throwing someone into, as Ethan Klein claims here, camps.
That's what you advocated for. Be honest. That's what you said. It's obviously what you said.
I never said camps. He said camps. Notice how he...
Hey, Hutchy boy, why did the U.S. consider Nelson Mandela a terrorist? I'm just curious as to what your opinion is, considering you're a white man living in an empire that is still stealing resources from other countries. Before we get to that, and I'm happy to talk about that, are you aware that Nelson Mandela supported Israel's right to exist and advocated for a two-state solution? Are you aware of that? He was technically a Zionist. Did you know that? I swear to God, this brand of lefty would hate Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, or Nelson Mandela, who were all Zionists, by the way. He identified with Jewish persecution. It wasn't just like a tactical thing. It wasn't just like the practical workings of a one-state or a two-state. He identified with Jewish persecution and legitimately felt like they had a right to exist secure within borders. To answer your question, why did America have Nelson Mandela on the terrorist list for a long time? What do you want me to say? Our government has done and said bad things. They have held bad positions. They considered Martin Luther King to be a terrorist, if I'm not mistaken. Who is sweeping for the United States government? I assume they had him on a terrorist. I assume they classified him as a terrorist because he refused to denounce violence. He did not co-sign targeting civilians, but again and again and again, he refused to denounce violence. He believed that violence had become necessary at a certain point. Towards the end of his life, he embraced the doctrine of nonviolence again. So there was like a 40-year period or like a 35-year period where he was open to violence. Towards the end of his life, he was definitely like an advocate for nonviolent resistance. But he refused to broadly condemn violence. And so I assume that's why they called him a terrorist. But he was not a terrorist. He did not target civilians.
He's guiding the conversation in the aftermath without me being able to respond to lead you to believe that I want concentration camps.
Started to note if putting capitalists in re-education camps isn't disturbing enough, I started to notice that Hasan was carrying a lot of water for communist states' war crimes and genocides.
What do you call Crimea? I call it a part of Russian territory, bitch. That's what I call Crimea. I call it Crimea River, a Russian river. The annex.
Oh boy.
Is he going to respond to the actual full context here? I suspect not. Is he going to actually broach the subject matter even a little bit? Probably not. Let's see.
Annexation of Crimea is absolutely a justifiable annexation. Tibet was literally a feudal.
Okay. Nope. Just moving on. Got it. Okay. Russian communism is hilarious. Russia, as I have maintained over and over again, is an irredentist kleptocracy. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is unjustifiable.
So why did you say that you were on no one's side? You just said that like a week and a half ago or a week ago on Adam Friedland's podcast. When he was asked about Russia, Ukraine, he said, I'm on no one's side. But he's saying right here that Russia's invasion was unjustifiable. So why would you not take a side in that spot?
There are a million different moments where I have described this process. I fundraised for Ukrainian refugees to the tune of $200,000 after the invasion of Ukraine. I do not believe that Russia is a communist country at all. It is an authoritarian kleptocracy. Why is he presenting this? Why is he presenting this information as though I believe Russia is actually in the right here? There is a difference that I have maintained over and over again. Russia's annexation of Crimea.
I am going to get one guy today. You have a very childish way of thinking when it comes to America. You do realize that Latin Americans, the Middle East, Africa are all victims of the United States. You keep saying you understand, but fail to realize that we created this chaos. Look at Haiti. Haitians over 75,000 white men, women, and children. They were the first liberated black country. And generally speaking, most normal, sane individuals think that, I don't know how many people are pure pacifists who believe that you should never do any kind of violence. I'm not. I think that's it's kind of a silly position. Like if somebody tries to invade you or oppress you, seems like violence is sometimes necessary. I think most normal, sane individuals think that when you target civilians, it becomes unacceptable. And you can find examples like the ANC, for example, their struggle against apartheid that spanned 9 decades. I think the ANC the original inception was in like 1910 or 1915. And throughout their entire existence, I believe it was 100 to 200 civilians died. And they were not systematically targeted by the ANC. So we have examples of resistance movements that did not rely on terrorism.
Russia has a profoundly important military base in Sevastopol that it actually had a loanership agreement over with Ukraine even before it actually overtook Crimea. But there's a difference between the annexation of Crimea and what took place in the aftermath of said annexation of Crimea versus what Russia is doing in Ukraine right now. As far as
it appears as though Hasan is he's tactical about like which forms of imperialism he supports.
My stance,
it doesn't seem like he has a broad anti-imperialist position. If he's going to justify the Russian annexation of Crimea or the Chinese annexation of Tibet, which technically like on paper, Tibet was always a part of China, but it was a de facto independent state for like 4 decades when China invaded.
On this, there's no defense of Russia taking any additional land. Okay, this is a ridiculous act, and I have maintained the position that Crimea, throughout its historical,
and yet he's neutral in the Russia-Ukraine war. Okay.
Process under the USSR, even before then, has been Russified. This is precisely the reason why Western polls, not even like the Russian annexation and the subsequent quote unquote democratic process that took place, but the pre-Russian annexation, before Russia's military incursions in eastern Ukraine as well, people that
I'm fully getting one guide here. It's insane that you guys can't comprehend why Hamas even exists. Okay, let's see. Let's test the extent of your empathy. Why do you think Zionism exists? Honey, I'm curious. Could you articulate for me why you think Zionism as a project came to be? Why do you think that happened? You want to make space for the nuance, or like why Hamas exists, which is like a valid topic. That's of course valid. We should talk about like why Hamas came to power and what enabled their rise to power in Gaza. That's of course a relevant discussion, but you have space for that kind of nuance. But I wonder if you have any space for like, why do you think Zionism exists? Like, why do you think that came to be a thing? This is another point about Mandela too, by the way, because Mandela recognized that Zionism was a product of anti-Semitism. Like Mandela understood that project would not exist were it not for Jewish persecution in basically every country that they ever lived in throughout time.
That lived in Crimea were rather sympathetic to Russia already. This is part of the reason why Russian annexation of Crimea, while still unjustifiable under international rights and international humanitarian rights.
So why'd you say Crimea River, a Russian river? Did you change your mind? It seems like his position has shifted here.
Humanitarian law was done without a single shot being fired in the process.
I guess it was peaceful. It was a peaceful, forceful annexation.
Separate Crimea and the annexation of Crimea as opposed to
they peacefully forcibly annexed Crimea, I guess.
The completely ridiculous and incredibly violent invasion of Ukraine.
Is that even true? It involved a military invasion by Russian troops, which began in February 2014 and led to the annexation on March 18, 2014. The annexation was marked by the occupation of strategic sites, a controversial referendum, and the dismissal of the Crimean government. The international community, including Ukraine and many countries, condemned the annexation as a violation of international law and a violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity. So I guess if you like militarily invade and occupy a space without firing a bullet, I guess that's peaceful? I guess that's what he's saying.
In the aftermath of the annexation of Crimea, Ukraine shut off the waterways into Crimea by damming the waterways that were designed under the USSR into Crimea, making Crimea even reliant on Russian, making Crimea basically reliant on Russia. If this in and of itself, beyond the unjustifiable land extraction, land annexation, outside of the fact that the land annexation is still unjustifiable, if there was an opportunity for Ukraine to be able to salvage Crimea, it would have taken place already.
So it's condemnable. Okay. It's condemnable for Ukraine to what did they do? Destroy a dam in their resistance, but it's justifiable for example, like the Houthis blocking like trade throughout a particular like region.
I don't know why people still try to. I don't know why people still try to relitigate this process when Donald Trump has already offered Crimea with a legalized annexation to Russia. Now, as far as Tibet,
slave mandate, like so autonomous zone.
China did them a favor.
That was one. I mean, in America, when I say something like this, people get very upset. You know, we talk about the Dalai Lama saying "suck my tongue" or whatever, but like that's not far from the norm in normal Tibetan existence before the
This is, of course, and this is one of the more egregious examples, but this is, of course, wildly inconsistent. If Hasan is saying that it was justified for the Chinese military to, invade and annex and ethnically cleanse Tibet because there was a practice of slavery that occurred during that time, he's, of course, now saying that America would be justified in invading and annexing any country that currently practices slavery. What he's saying, right? Like
the Communist Party came in and
So China unilaterally took over Tibet,
like
swept their culture. They basically are trying to,
No one's culture is slavery. I don't know why. Like he brought up culture. There is no slavery culture here.
he's talking about Tibetan Buddhism, but okay.
From a Western perspective, this immediately.
They destroyed Tibetan Buddhist temples. They outlawed the practice of the religion, I believe, right? He's focusing in on the practice of slavery, but he's obviously not talking about like when he says their culture was quelched. There was like mass murder. Yes, the Chinese government has destroyed many Buddhist temples in Tibet. The destruction of Tibetan Buddhist monasteries began in 1945 in Manchuria. Spread to Tibet from 1959, continued during the Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976. During the Cultural Revolution, they saw the destruction of thousands of monastic dwellings and expulsion of monks, nuns, and lay practitioners from the Larungar Buddhist Institute. In 1960, Tengdro Monastery was destroyed during the wave of violence that followed Mao's call for democratic reforms. The current status today, many monasteries in Tibet have been reestablished, but they are often seen as a show of tolerance by Chinese authorities.
This immediately rings alarm bells where it's like, well, you're making the British Empire had to permanently occupy India because they all have had a barbaric culture or whatever, or that the United States of America had to.
Wait, what is this? Breaking new evidence set to drop momentarily linking Epstein file cover-up to a member of the Trump administration. Who is this person? U.S. Army Colonel, retired combat veteran, SecDef advisor, author, consultant, military TV analyst. Who is this person? Do we like this person? Okay. Keep an eye on that.
To tame the savages. That is not the argument here at all. Okay? That is not my argument at all. And while there are issues with the continued sovereignty over Tibet that China has had, Tibet being a part of the Chinese empire in perpetuity and having some semblance of autonomy throughout even the nationalist process, and certainly under Mao as well, has been the same thing since the fucking...
Some semblance of autonomy? Wait, what?
19th century.
Yeah, what did he just say that they had? He said that Tibet had some semblance of autonomy under Mao?
It was the Tibetans themselves that wanted to rise up against the feudal land ownership.
I believe that there was an incident, a particular incident where it was either 1,000 or multiple thousands of Tibetan civilians showed up to try to protect a monastery. So this idea that there was this, he's kind of promulgating the narrative that China came in and, freed everybody from their oppressors, but I don't think it's quite that simple.
It wasn't simply just Chinese annexation and occupation.
I mean, it was.
It was actually an abolition of serfdom in Tibet.
Okay.
This is no different than other Han Chinese areas that were previously occupied by the nationalist forces, where once the Maoist forces took over, a lot of the peasant class that was under the rulership and even fought alongside the nationalist forces defected. The reason as to why they defected was because they wanted to restructure Chinese society completely. Because when faced with these two options of working with Mao, working alongside Mao, and rewriting the rules of Chinese land ownership, they, of course, chose a universalized land ownership structure rather than going back to the nationalist-dominated previous landlord ruling over the peasant class structure that they existed under. It is not different. What happened in Tibet is also not different. What happened afterwards is
Tibetan peasants resisted Chinese occupation during the invasion. Following the Chinese invasion in 1950, Tibetans, particularly in the Chamdo area, engaged in military conflict against the Chinese forces. I wonder why he left that out. The 1959 Tibetan uprising marked a significant resistance movement where hundreds of thousands Hundreds of thousands of Tibetans protested against Chinese rule, leading to the Dalai Lama fleeing into exile. This uprising is a pivotal moment in the ongoing struggle for Tibetan independence and resistance against the Chinese occupation. Wonder why you left that out.
That is a certainty, because Tibetans still, as far as I understand, maintain a lot of love and a lot of support for the existing Dalai Lama, regardless of the fact that the CIA actually used that to their advantage, gave a lot of money to the Dalai Lama. It doesn't matter. Tibetans like the Dalai Lama. That's it. Okay? And there are contemporary issues in Tibet right now as far as Tibetan sovereignty, Tibetan culture, and these are still significant problems. But if we're talking about the way that the Chinese annexation of Tibet took place, it's not the same as China coming in and taming the barbaric Tibetans. Tibetan serfs did not want to be serfs. They did not want to continue existing within the peasant structure where they were being dominated by land.
Okay, I mean, would it be justified for America to invade India because they still practice the caste system there? Would that be, I mean, I guess according to Hasan, that would be morally justified, correct?
Landlords, they're landowners.
I mean, that would be a very bloody war, but yeah.
Homogenize the culture.
If your culture,
They're trying to swell the religion and the identity.
The part of feudal warlords and slavery, abolishing that, yes, I do think that is good.
No, China did them a favor.
This is a good way to describe Taiwan as well. The American federal government going to the South and killing, unfortunately not all of them, but a decent amount of slavers and defenders of slavery. This is violent retribution from a powerful federal government that squashed, okay?
By the time China invaded, again, Tibet had been a de facto independent nation for multiple decades, like 4 decades.
That is the South in the Civil War?
Yes.
Like imagine like this analogy would be appropriate if like the Southern Confederacy had essentially been operating as an independent nation for like 45 decades.
Yes.
45 decades, Jesus Christ, for like 40 years.
The previous serfdom structure, and it's not Tibetan culture. I think it's like ridiculous to say. It's like, I think this is akin to saying like black people in the South.
He's talking about Tibetan Buddhist culture. It is an objective fact that China wanted to erase Tibetan Buddhist culture.
It's just a part of their culture to be enslaved. That's not the case. Okay?
This is such a gross... And this is what he does. Like, I feel like Hasan's like patented move is the straw man. You know, everybody has like different logical fallacies that they fall back on. And Hasan's superpower, his Hadouken, is the straw man. Because Ethan never made that claim about slavery being like the main component of Tibetan culture.
That's not the case at all.
It's just, he's just wildly distorting what Ethan said.
The reason why I try to use this analogy.
How do people not see through this? Like, how do his viewers not like question in that moment, like, did Ethan say that?
Analogy here is because it was initially an action of resistance against the the feudal serfdom structure in Tibet.
Yes.
And most disturbingly, a complete whitewashing of the Chinese.
It was just a full-on Chinese military invasion. Like he's framing it like it was this massive uprising of the proletariat or whatever.
Against their Muslim minority group, the Uyghurs.
Really?
Don't they have Uyghur death camps? Is that?
It's not a death camp. They were re-education camps, and they are no longer in operation.
Is that
according
true?
to the Associated Press?
I mean, is that true? Wait, that's news to me. The Xinjiang, am I saying that right? Internment camps, officially called vocational education and training centers by the government of the People's Republic of China, are internment camps operated by the government of Xinjiang and the Chinese Communist Party Provincial Standing Committee. Human Rights Watch says that they have been used to indoctrinate Uyghurs and other Muslims since 2014 as a part of the People's War on Terror, a policy announced in 2014. 37 countries have expressed support for China's government for counterterrorism and de-radicalization measures. The Xinjiang Zongtai Group is running some of the re-education camps and uses reallocated workers in their facilities. I don't know where he's seeing that. Has China really closed its re-education camps in Xinjiang? Are the re-education camps in Xinjiang closed? The Chinese government claims they are, and journalists and sinologists from Europe and the United States confirm it. Washington Post article from September 2022 concluded that the re-education camp program appears to have ended in 2019 under international pressure. The article made waves internationally. Last year, 2 German experts on China wrote in a guest article for NZZ that the camps have now largely been dissolved. They demanded if human rights situation continues to normalize demonstrably, the EU should enter into dialogue and reconsider the sanctions imposed on China over Xinjiang. The reality is more complex, however, as NZZ investigation in Xinjiang shows. On a week-long trip in November, NZZ journalists visited 30 prisons in various parts of Xinjiang, a region 5 times the size of Germany. The exact location of the camps were pinpointed by the think tank Australian Strategic Policy Institute using satellite images. The think tank, which is partly funded by governments in Australia, Japan, and the US and Europe, classified both re-education camps and prison under the term detention facilities. Based on satellite images, ASPI found in 2020 there were 384 such detention facilities in Xinjiang at peak time. In 2022, the AP news agency received a list containing the names of 10,000 imprisoned Uyghurs in Xinjiang. According to the report, almost 4% of the population of the Koneshahar district is imprisoned. This is one of the highest incarceration rates in the world. So it looks like the government is claiming one thing, and journalists and other third-party like agencies are claiming another thing.
Everything I said here is correct. I don't know why he put this in the video. I assume he's not going to make an argument against this, and instead simply claim that it's a genocide that took place and he's hiding it or something. I don't know. Let's see.
I saw this crazy documentary, and I don't know. I don't know the surrounding narrative or anything about it, but it was about there was doctors in the area. They would be able to procure organs.
No, that's no.
I'm telling you, they were in China.
Human Rights Watch, thanks for that link. In May 2014, the government, oh boy, how long is this? I'm not even sure like why Hasan stubbornly, he seems to be, I don't know if he's defending China for it. He's like, I think at best he's saying, yeah, they used to do re-education camps, but they're not doing that anymore. I mean, it's still really bad that they threw tens of thousands of Uyghur Muslims into re-education camps, where some of them were tortured.
Dog, that one is like Shen Yun.
Okay, so he saw a documentary. This was the conversation that took place. I don't even remember the full details, but he's saying that he watched a documentary. I immediately suspected it's probably like a Falun Gong documentary. Falun Gong is a right-wing anti-Communist Party of China cult that's anti-miscegenation. They're the ones who also own Shen Yun and Epoch Times and numerous other media outlets that are super far right, and they work alongside the CIA. Having said that, this does not mean that there is no repression in Xinjiang. Of course, there is major repression in Xinjiang. There was a lot more major repression in Xinjiang, especially a couple of years ago. For those of you who don't know,
seems pretty bad.
There is an East Turkestan separation movement in Xinjiang. Okay, some of the Uyghur
seems
Muslims,
not great.
Many of them also trained by the CIA. Some of them are in Syria right now. Wanted to separate from China, mainland China. In the process of enacting their separatist goals, there was a lot of knife crime, a lot of terror, and the Chinese government, in my opinion, completely, in the most ridiculous ways possible, enacted an unimaginably cruel regime of surveillance and also cultural erasure and also concentration camps, but re-education camps, where they claimed that these were simply vocational retraining schools. Worked to actively.
Who has two thumbs? Who has two thumbs and got a Dune Awakening beta code for this weekend? This guy right here. Oh, we are gonna Dune it up this weekend with Bruce. Oh my goodness.
And ruthlessly re-educate the Uyghur Muslims. Okay, they bullied an entire population into submission. There was mass violence that took place.
I gotta order some food, man.
So I have never said that this was acceptable. I've never considered this to be appropriate. I'm always critical of this. This is something that a lot of people get mad at me over because they say, where did you learn all that? Did you watch a documentary too? They'll say Adrian Zen's propaganda. It is still completely unacceptable. It's ridiculous.
Okay.
What I'm doing here against Ethan is recognizing the truth of the matter. So let's take a look.
We can get you an organ. From a Uyghur. But why is that? Is that really that crazy?
The Associated Press quietly wrote an article that didn't get a lot of coverage in mainstream media about how, like, okay, well, all the concentration camps have been closed now. Like, all the re-education camps are closed now in
Xinjiang, and it's like very different vibes in Xinjiang. And now, you know, it's the tourism hour.
Let's see what the Associated Press actually had to.
Why is China invading Tibet to end slavery different than the Spanish invading Aztecs or supporting those groups who existed under Aztec oppression and West African slavery and the British? Yeah, really simple. It's because they fought alongside the Tibetan communists and then they fought them over in the process, but they initially fought alongside the Tibetan Maoist movements. That's the difference.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
You're also comparing a foreign invasion coming in to the Aztecs thousands of miles away to an autonomous region.
So if you could find examples of like indigenous Aztecs that like, you know, fought alongside the like Spanish colonialists, that it would make the Spanish colonization more justified. Is that what he's saying?
Region that was already under Chinese rulership, and the previous Chinese rulership did just simply overlooked the structure of serfdom. They didn't give a shit. They were like, yeah, the Dalai Lamas can do whatever they want. They want to chop an ear off? That's great. That is the real problem here, because it's not like Tibet was not under a autonomous part of China. It was an autonomous region that was still under Chinese rulership. It's just that the previous Chinese empires did not care about what the they were doing to the Tibetans.
To be clear, I mean, they were busy fighting like a decades-long civil war in China. But yes, Tibet had been operating as it's not an official, but a de facto independent nation for something like 4 decades or 5 decades.
Serves to the Tibetan peasant class, and also on top of that, even the Nationalist Party did not care about that same.
What do you guys? What do you guys think I should order for food? I always go with Greek. It seems like a healthy option, you know, like rice, chicken, some veggies. I had tacos yesterday, so I don't know about that. My go-to is always like tacos or Greek. We're gonna do tamales. We're gonna get crazy with it.
Landlord slash feudal serfdom structure that existed in Tibet. That's a major difference, don't you think? That's a major historical difference. Having said that, however, I think that there are still many issues in terms of not giving enough autonomy to Tibet or not cherishing certain aspects of Tibetan culture, Tibetan language. This is a real problem in China. This is a real issue in China. Okay.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's good that he made that concession, I suppose.
In terms of the historical, reference point, because you're failing to understand my point here. You said the Spanish fought alongside the anti-Aztec local fighters with the majority of the fighters. Tibet was loosely under Chinese rulership but never Sinicized. I know. I'm not saying that the Sinicization of Tibet is the appropriate measure. I'm saying it's actually the part that I'm critical of is precisely that. But what you fail to comprehend here is that what came in the aftermath of this was not
again, he is striking a totally different tone in this conversation where he's reacting to the content. It's a totally different tone. When he was having the conversation with Ethan, he was basically saying like, you know, the Chinese military invading Tibet was like the American Civil War and American, you know, Northerners liberating Southern slaves. He was full on like defending Chinese military aggression and the Chinese annexation, like full-throatedly with Ethan. And now he's doing this reaction. He's like, now he's getting into the nuance about like cultural destruction and a lot of the injustice that took place during that period.
Same serfdom structure. They didn't do that. They didn't just go back to the land rulership structure in Tibet, but now with Chinese ownership. Do you see what I mean? And also the relationship between Tibet and Chinese sovereignty is, of course, entirely different than the relationship between colonial Spanish occupation over the Aztecs. There is not hundreds of years of being under Chinese rulership despite having autonomy. And also what happened to the aftermath of that is important, don't you think? I mean, that slavery of the Tibetan masses.
That would change the calculus?
Conducted by the Communist Party of China. Anyway, Hasan, I can see the fear in your eyes. Maybe we should call it on the Content Nuke. That's so funny. All of these people that have been begging for me to watch this are now finally coming in to be like, you shouldn't watch this, actually. I feel like you're afraid.
Well, I mean, he does appear to me to be like a little rattled here, but yeah. I think he intuitively understands that like a lot of these clips do not look great. Like a lot of clips that Ethan is featuring in his content cop don't look great. And so he's doing this crazy, like, he's just fully sanitizing the shit that he said, from the re-education camp earlier to the framing of the entire like Chinese occupation of Tibet. He sounds totally different. He's essentially saying two very different things now and when he was having the conversation with Ethan. In other words, he's being kind of a Weasley little liar. Yeah.
Articles from the last 2 years.
There's also ignoring that Spain practiced slavery in Mexico. Like it would be the same if, yes, China went in, okay, no collaboration whatsoever, no demands whatsoever from Tibetan Maoists and Tibetan communists that wanted to rid themselves of the antiquated practice of serfdom that was incredibly violent, incredibly brutal. Okay, and instead just reformed that exact same societal structure and continued to enslave Tibetans. But that's not what happened. So obviously, you know, there is a major difference here. This doesn't mean that there is any sort of. This doesn't mean that like it's great. I'm not saying that it is. Okay, I'm simply offering some nuance to the way that people frame these.
Well, I mean, you very clearly before were saying that it was essentially justified. That's what you said. And now you sound totally different.
Conversations as black and white and try to make
completely different
to make it work within the imperialist structure in the same way that like you understand Spanish colonialization. Okay.
Press actually had to say about this. These are all AP articles from the last 2 years. UK independent body reports China committed genocide in Xinjiang. China sanctioned a U.S. research firm and 2 individuals over a report about the human rights violations in Xinjiang.
It's the tourism hour.
To China's fury, UN accuses Beijing.
Okay. He pulls up a lot of these AP articles, and I feel like from all of the clips that I've seen on the Context Nuke, he basically does not go into great detail about these articles at all. I don't think he's read any of these articles at all. Many of these articles are basically from National Endowment of Democracy funded groups like NGOs that are playing a significant role here. Okay. Having said that, is there veracity to some of these claims? Absolutely. Okay.
Then why are you trying to cast doubt on the findings? Like, why are you trying to poison the well about the source of the information if your ultimate conclusion is that you agree that China has been repressing Uyghur Muslims? Like, why? See that instinct, that immediate instinct he has to discredit the people that are providing the information. And then at the end, he goes, well, you know, that being said, I agree that bad things happened. Like, he just sounds totally fucking different here.
Some of the claims that he's highlighting in the headlines is actually correct. The problem is,
okay,
and I don't know what the
that's quite a maneuver.
These articles are from or what these articles are actually featuring. But I would go so far as to suspect that he's making it seem as though the article that I was referencing, the article that I was reading, as a matter of fact, in terms of China's re-education and cultural erasure has ended, and that Xinjiang has now become a tourism destination. He claims that that article does not exist, except here is the article. So while he was actually looking for all of these different article headlines that he could draw from, what happened? Did he just simply...
Okay, let's take a look at this article. What does it actually say? Terror and tourism. The razor wire that once ringed public buildings for China's far northwestern Xinjiang region is nearly all gone. Gone too are the middle school uniforms in military camouflage and the armored personnel carriers rumbling around the homeland of the Uyghurs. Gone are many of the surveillance cameras that once glared down like birds from overhead poles, and the eerie eternal wail of sirens that in the ancient blah, 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 blah. But there is no doubt about who rules, and evidence of the terror of the last 4 years is everywhere. It's seen in Xinjiang cities where many historic centers have been bulldozed and the Islamic call to prayer no longer rings out. It's seen in Kashgar, where one mosque was converted into a cafe and a section of another has been turned into a tourist toilet. It's seen deep in the countryside where Han Chinese officials run villages. And it's seen in the fear that was ever present just below the surface on 2 rare trips to Xinjiang I made for the Associated Press. One on a state-guided tour for the foreign press. Is he citing this article as evidence that, oh, well, China got their act together? They're no longer doing that thing. Because this article describes basically like a dystopian nightmare for someone who had their cultural identity erased. Doesn't sound great. Doesn't sound great. If he reads this article and his only conclusion that he jumps to is like, oh, they're no longer doing the camps. Like, well, it seems pretty bad. At one point, I was tailed by a convoy of 12 cars, an eerie procession through the silent streets of Aksu at 4 a.m. Anytime I tried to chat with someone, the minders would draw in close, straining to hear every word. It's hard to know why Chinese authorities have shifted to subtler methods of controlling the region. Why is Hasan citing this article, bro? It may be that searing criticism from the West, along with punishing political and commercial sanctions, have pushed authorities to lighten up. Or it may simply be that China judges it has come far enough in its goal of subduing the Uyghurs and other mostly Muslim minorities to relax its grip. Uyghur activists abroad accuse Chinese government of genocide, pointing to plunging birth rates and the mass detention. The authorities say their goal is not to eliminate Uyghurs, but to integrate them, and that harsh measures are necessary to curb extremism. Regardless of intent, one thing is clear. Many of the practices that made the Uyghur culture a living thing, raucous gathering, strict Islamic habits, heated debate, have been restricted or banned. In their place, the authorities have crafted a sterilized version, one ripe for commercialization. Xinjiang officials took us on a tour to the Grand Bazaar in the center of Urumqi, has been rebuilt for tourists like many other cities in Xinjiang. Here there are giant plastic bearded Uyghur men and a giant plastic Uyghur instrument. A nearby museum for traditional non-bread sells tiny plastic keychains, Uyghur hats, and fridge magnets. Crowds of Han Chinese snap selfies. James Liebold, a prominent scholar of Xinjiang ethnic policy, calls it the museumification of Uyghur culture. Chinese officials call it progress. China has long struggled to integrate the Uyghurs, a historically Muslim group of 13 million people with close linguistic, ethnic, and cultural ties to Turkey. Since the Communist Party took control of Xinjiang in 1949, Beijing's leaders have debated whether stricter or softer measures are more effective in absorbing the vast territory, half the size of India. For decades, policy in Xinjiang swung back and forth, even as the state granted special benefits to minorities such as hiring quotas and extra points on entrance exams. Glass ceilings, racism, and restrictions on religion alienated and angered many Uyghurs. The harder the government tried to control the Uyghurs, the more stubbornly many clung to their identity. A few resorted to violence, carrying out bombings and knifings against the state they believe would never accord them genuine respect. Hundreds of innocent civilians, both Han Chinese and Uyghur, perished in increasingly deadly attacks. The debate ended soon after President Xi Jinping's rise to power in 2012. The state chose forced assimilation, detaining Uyghurs and other minorities indiscriminately by the thousands, branding them as suspected terrorists. Today, many checkpoints and police stations are gone and the bombings have stopped, but the racial divide remains clear. Uyghurs live trapped in an invisible system that restricts their every move. It's near impossible for them to get passports, and on planes to and from Xinjiang, most passengers are from China's Han Chinese majority. Uyghurs who live outside Xinjiang must register with local police and report to an officer on a regular basis. Their moves are tracked and monitored. Many Uyghurs living in Xinjiang aren't allowed to leave the region. What I'm reading sounds like a brutally repressive system that came after years of much more forceful repression. Like, these circumstances sound horrifying. And Hasan seems to be referencing this article as if it proves that, like, China got their act together.
I feel like from all of the clips that I've seen on the Context Nuke, he basically does not go into great detail about these articles at all. I don't think he's read any of these articles at all. Many of these articles are basically from National Endowment of Democracy funded groups like NGOs that are playing a significant role here. Okay. Having said that, is there veracity to some of these claims? Absolutely. Okay. Some of the claims that he's highlighting in the headlines is actually correct. The problem is, and I don't know what when these articles are from or what these articles are actually featuring, but I would go so far as to suspect that he's making it seem as though the article that I was referencing, the article that I was reading, as a matter of fact, in terms of China's re-education and cultural erasure has ended, and that Xinjiang has now become a tourism destination.
Oh my God. That is such a wildly I'm sorry, I did it again. That is such a wildly distorted take about what's in that article. That is crazy. Did he read the article? Did he even read the article? Explain why. He's saying that, oh, China stopped that, basically saying China stopped the re-education camps and now it's a tourist attraction. It is a dystopian nightmare of a tourist attraction. After they culturally genocided 13 million people and put little like non-trinkets in gift shops. Meanwhile, these Uyghur Muslims have to check in with police like once a week or whatever. That is unless I'm missing something.
He claims that article does not exist, except here is the article. So while he was actually looking for all of these different article headlines that he could draw from, what happened? Did he just simply fail to find terror and tourism? Xinjiang eases its grip, but fear remains. This is the Associated Press article that I was actually reading and referencing to Ethan Klein. in that conversation. Xinjiang, China. The razor wire that once ringed public buildings in China's far northwestern Xinjiang region is nearly all gone. Gone too are the middle school uniforms and military camouflage.
Oh God, is he going to stop after the first like 2 paragraphs and not dive into the minutia of like the rest of the article?
And the armored personnel carriers rumbling around the homeland of the Uyghurs. Gone are many of the surveillance cameras that once glared down like birds from overhead poles, and the eerie eternal wail of sirens in the ancient Silk Road city of Kashgar.
Tell me he doesn't stop there.
This right here is basically the summarization of like my summarization of the story is this article saying that they ended their operations. They ended their operations, and the clips that, and here's why.
Dog. That is wildly dishonest. That is wildly dishonest. In fact, you can tell the narrative strategy in terms of like the structure of that article. Whoever wrote that article for AP was obviously setting up like something nefarious that follows. You know, like they say that they've ended the practice of this, that, and this. However, when you actually go there, it's a fucking nightmare. That's the structure of the article. But he stopped after the first 2 paragraphs, dishonestly trying to frame the article as though it's saying like, everything's fine. It's a tourist attraction now. That is so wildly dishonest. Or he just didn't read the rest of the article. That's actually so egregious. My goodness.
I say he's devoid of context. This is the reason why I call this the context.
Holy moly.
I call this the context nuke is because he rips these clips, which I don't even know where he sourced them from. Okay, because I don't think he sourced them himself. I think someone gave him these clips.
Who cares?
If he were to actually,
who cares? Who cares? We all get clips from our chat. All of us. He gets clips from his chat all the time. This is like a normal streaming thing. Who cares where he got the clips? It doesn't matter. Link the article. Anybody can read this article. I mean, it's not a pretty picture of the Xinjiang region or whatever, however you say that.
If he actually cared about understanding the nuance of this position that I'm presenting, he would recognize that some of the clips that he pulled out are literally directly from me covering this article. Here it is, October 13, 2021, Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Gone too are the middle school uniforms and military camouflage and the armored personnel carriers rumbling around the homeland of the Uyghurs. Gone are the many of the surveillance cameras that once glared down like birds from overhead poles and the eerie eternal wail of sirens in the ancient Silk Road city of Kashgar. Uyghur teenage boys, once a rare sight, now flirt with girls over pounding dance music at rollerblading rinks. One cab driver blasted Shakira as she raced through the streets. 4 years after Beijing launched a brutal crackdown that swept up 1 million or more Uyghurs and other mostly Muslim minorities into detention camps and prisons, its control of Xinjiang has entered a new era. Chinese authorities have scaled back many of the most draconian and invisible aspects of the region's high-tech police state. The panic that gripped the region a few years ago has subsided considerably, and a sense of normality is creeping back in. It's because
it's on his screen. The very next paragraph, it's on his screen. The very next paragraph is, but there is no doubt about who rules, and evidence of the terror of the last 4 years is everywhere. That is the next sentence in the article.
Is he purposely limited the search to 2 years so his article was left out intentionally? Now, time and time again, time and time
fucking unbelievable.
As much as people say
this is fucking unbelievable. To represent that article as though it is painting a rosy picture of what is going on in that region is so dishonest. It is so dishonest.
Glazer, which I am a China glazer, let's be real. Time and time again, I've actually brought up the unjustifiable practice of mass detention and mass surveillance and dragnets that were cast upon the Uyghur Muslim population in Xinjiang. I do not think it's appropriate, and I do not think it's acceptable. And I have made that very clear over and over again. I've actually made fun of the people that are so invested in defending China that they come in here and sometimes act like hogs, but for China. And say the exact same things that hogs say about Muslims and Muslim detention or immigrant detention in the United States of America, but this time for China. This is an age-old bit that I do all the time. But if you were actually interested in the nuance or my actual perspective on this, you could have probably figured it out by, I don't know, doing a cursory analysis, just in Googling it, you know? He admitted on a stream that he got these clips from someone, but because I'm not insane, I don't have the clip of him saying it on me.
Who cares?
Having said that, going back to...
What's matter? Thank you so much for the primer.
Appreciate
it, buddy.
The first article that comes up, Terror and Tourism, Xinjiang eases grips, but fear remains. Now, there's some other articles that he's also sourced here, which I suspect he probably didn't look at. And I think it's important to understand the
like, what does he think that but fear remains, like, means? If not to suggest that, like, the very title of the article is very explicitly suggesting that the situation is not as rosy as the Chinese government is claiming. That's the obvious implication of that title. That's the obvious implication of the title. And yet he's referencing the article to basically, parrot the Chinese Communist Party talking points about this.
Here on what he's talking about, because he's trying to make it seem as though he's basically pulling articles from after our conversation to imply that that I was lying, that the Xinjiang detention had not ended. He's also implying that I'm actually in favor of this detention. I am not. I'm in favor of the truth. Okay. So when I actually retaliate and say, no, those are not death camps. Those are not like, there's no like organ harvesting operation that's taking place. I'm simply combating.
Lars, thank you so much for the tier 1 sub, buddy.
My primary purpose. Okay. In a lot of circumstances, it's usually right-wing misinformation. You guys love it when I do it to Joe Rogan, but you seemingly don't like it if I'm doing it to a liberal position. Okay.
Uyghur County in China has the highest prison rate in the world. 1 in 25 people is in a Chinese prison.
It's the tourism hour.
48 Uyghurs detained in Thailand for almost 11 years are on hunger strike to protest their imminent deportation to China, where they face imprisonment or execution.
Not only does this AP article seem not to exist, reading the AP proved exactly the opposite.
So again, he claims that this AP article does not exist. It obviously exists.
Well, the reason why he doesn't think it exists because the way you describe the article looks nothing like what the actual article is. So you can't really fault Ethan for like looking for this AP article and not finding what you're referencing because you erroneously framed the entire article.
So what the are you talking about? Here is the AP article. Here's a video of me reading the AP article. Why would you even put this in the video? What kind of research have you done? Also, none of this even proves your point, which was that you watched a documentary that I suspected was like a Shenyun or Falun Gong documentary that said that there were death camps in China. None of what he has shown so far has said that there are death camps in China. Part of the reason why I don't think that he was able to prove his perspective in the conversation at all is because they weren't death camps and I was right. They were re-education camps. And I've never said that that was appropriate or permissible or acceptable. I've always been against that.
Wow. I mean, maybe for Muslims, but not necessarily against it for capitalists, I guess.
This is the problem. And people will say, Hasan,
you made it to live stream fail 10 minutes ago, 70 upvotes.
There's a difference between re-educating people who have done crimes in the process of rehabilitation, okay, versus doing dragnets against an entire minority population and mass surveillance against an entire minority population. That is what I'm against. I am in favor of re-education and rehabilitation for those who have actually done severe crimes. I think that is an infinitely better way to deal with that than to execute them or to imprison them like we do in the United States of America. This is a consistent position that I have maintained throughout my entire political commentary career. This is part of the reason why I'm also endlessly charitable to people who have done thought crimes, who have been reactionary from time to time, because I believe that we are, subject to social conditioning. Okay? Now, it doesn't make any sense, but I'll just start out by saying we're 8 minutes in and his research is not so great. He doesn't prove his point at all. He brings up all of these other articles that have come out after this conversation in an effort to imply.
I think he proved his point quite well, to be honest.
That my article actually did not exist at all and that these things are still happening. But I'm willing to bet that if we were to look at these articles, even if they came after our conversation, we would find out that the articles itself were talking about what China was doing before they ended the mass detention structure that they had.
Bro, they culturally genocided millions of people, bro.
This is a UK independent body. China committed genocide in Xinjiang. An independent, unofficial body set up by a prominent British barrister to assess the evidence on China's alleged rights abuses against the Uyghurs. Concluded Thursday the Chinese government committed genocide and crimes against humanity. This is the only article that says that China did a genocide. Okay?
What would you describe it as?
Tribunal made up of lawyers, academics, and business people doesn't have any government backing or powers to sanction or punish China, but organizes hope.
It sounds like, from what we read, what China did to the Uyghur population just sounds like textbook genocide or cultural genocide, if you want to be more specific.
The process of publicly laying out evidence will compel international action to tackle Beijing's policies against the Uyghurs, a largely Muslim ethnic group. Tribunal chair Jeffrey Nice said the genocide ruling was based on evidence that the Chinese government's forced birth control and sterilization policies targeting Uyghurs in the far western Xinjiang province were intended to destroy a significant part of the group's population. The abuse was part of the comprehensive policies directly linked to President Xi Jinping and the highest levels of Chinese government, it said. Now, this is not a real court. This is not the ICC. This is not the ICJ. This is simply oh
my God, dude.
Tribunal, which does happen. Okay, Brace, friend of the show, Brace Belden, YPJ. Brace Belden has actually participated in a people's tribunal, I believe, against the former Duterte leadership. I think it was the Duterte leadership, if I'm not mistaken. There has been an intention to destroy the act of interfering with the birth of a group. About 30 witnesses and experts gave evidence to a series of public hearings in central London this year alleging torture, forced abortions, beatings by authorities while in state detention centers. The tribunal concluded that it was beyond the doubt that the crimes against humanity were committed. Nice said she and other senior officials bear primary responsibility for what has occurred in Xinjiang. Once again, I don't see the organ harvesting or the execution camps that
just mass detention, you know, cultural repression, cultural genocide, forced sterilization, forced abortions. I'm not seeing the death camps, Ethan.
Ethan was talking about here. This is still unacceptable, okay? Completely unacceptable and not a part of, considering that I don't actually agree with the Chinese detention structure that exists in Xinjiang.
Well, that's great.
Not even against my position. My position was literally that Ethan is wrong about Chinese death camp.
Your position is that, you know, China ended the oppression and now Xinjiang is a tourist attraction and everything's great. That's what your position is.
Okay? Chinese death camps and forced organ harvesting. These were fabulous claims being made. Why did you skip over the Chinese embassy statement? Tanky propagandist. The tribunal and its so-called conclusions are merely clumsy and shows staged by anti-China elements for their self-entertainment. Anyone with conscience and reason will not be deceived or fooled. Yeah, the Chinese government, if I was pro-China, I will give you what the pro-China position is, okay? The pro-China position is that these separatist elements,
Jacob, what's up, buddy?
John, are radical Islamist fundamentalists that were propped up by the CIA, and there is a little bit of truth to that as well, but that doesn't matter, okay? Because it doesn't matter in the way that they dealt with this issue, okay? The Chinese Uyghur separatist terrorists were actually doing slaughter, mass slaughter, doing unimaginable amounts of attacks all over China and certainly in Xinjiang as well. So that's the reason why they had to do roundups and very targeted roundups. And
do I need to draw a parallel here? Do I need to say it? He's sort of dancing around it, but in a roundabout way, saying that because there were civilian deaths as a result of Uyghur violence who were, you know, resisting their oppressors. He seems to be dancing around it without actually saying it, that this means that it would be justified to round them all up or to round up the people that did those things. Do I need to draw a parallel between the current conflict? You could use that logic to apply to a lot of different circumstances.
Create vocational schools where these guys were simply getting educated for vocational training. That's not my position at all. As a matter of fact, I've argued against that position quite frequently. Okay?
Okay.
That is a lie. That is an exaggeration by a state that makes it seem as though their completely warrantless and unjustifiable detention structure was actually simply justifiable and was working.
But also the Uyghurs were propped up by the CIA and, you know, they did violence. But I'm not supporting it. But they were propped up by the CIA. It's like, why would you even mention something like that?
Towards rehabilitation. I don't agree with that position. I think that's a classic moment where a state lies, right? The Chinese state also has the capacity to lie. They're not infallible. There are plenty of issues with the Chinese state. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm defending the Chinese practice of mass detention anyway.
Okay.
And ironically enough,
why'd you mention the CIA thing?
Talking about here, the article that we were talking about here also features this. To China's fury, UN accuses Beijing of Uyghur rights abuses. Remember, Ethan actually posted this as an own. Mm-hmm. In that same article that he posted, if he had actually read that article, he would see this part where.
Oh boy. Okay. I guess we have to read another article. So he like laser focused on one line which said that they closed the detention facilities. For some reason there's a map.
Own.
Yeah, whatever.
In that same article that he posted, if he had actually read that article, he would see this part where it says Beijing has closed many of the camps which are called vocational training and education centers, but hundreds of thousands of people continue to languish in prison, many in vague secret charges. The report called
that doesn't sound great, but hundreds of thousands of people continue to languish in prison, many on vague secret charges. That seems like camps, you know, or camp adjacent.
Called on trying to release all individuals arbitrarily detained to clarify the whereabouts of those who have disappeared and whose families are seeking information about them.
Hello? Does he think that this is helping his point? The fact that he got like real silent afterwards, I think that's pretty obvious why he did that. He's like, oh shit. Why did I have to keep reading?
There's never been a moment where I did not claim that there weren't serious human rights violations in the Xinjiang region, just like UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
Okay, do we even need to read all this to know that he's like wildly distorting what the article said? Let's just focus on this part here. So immediately out. So Beijing has closed many of the camps, which it called vocational training and education centers. But hundreds of thousands of people continue to languish in prison, many on vague secret charges. The report called on China to release all individuals arbitrarily detained and to clarify the whereabouts of those who have disappeared and whose families are seeking information about them. Japan is highly concerned about human rights conditions in Xinjiang, and we believe that it is important that universal values such as freedom, basic human rights, and the rule of law are guaranteed in China. Chief Cabinet Secretary Hirokazu Matsuno said Germany and Britain also welcomed its publication. British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, who is also the frontrunner in the contest to replace Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, noted that the report includes, quote, harrowing evidence, including firsthand accounts from victims, that shames China in the eyes of the international community. Human Rights Watch said the report laid a solid foundation for further UN action to establish accountability for the abuses. Quote, never has it been so important for the UN system to stand up to Beijing and to stand up with victims. So the article is about the international community rejecting China's claims that they have ended this horrible practice of arbitrary detention. They're saying that there's still human rights violations that are ongoing right now. And Hasan used this article, and the only thing he focuses on is this one sentence right here. It's so dishonest. It's so unbelievably dishonest. Every time I press play on the Twitch player, it takes like 5 seconds to start playing.
Human rights violations in the Xinjiang region. I agree that there were serious human rights violations in the Xinjiang region. There's never been a moment where I've actually defended the serious human rights violations in the Xinjiang region. So why did Ethan, one, do a horrible job? Why did he do a horrible job of not reading his own articles that he posted in here? Okay. This is, and yes, you are right, KO Fishy. This is exactly like when I denied or went after atrocity propaganda in the aftermath of October 7. There was plenty of real atrocities that took place on October 7, but Israel greatly increased the intensity of atrocity propaganda in an effort to justify its genocidal ambitions that came immediately after October 7. What did they do in the process? They lied about 40 babies being lit on fire with kerosene and numerous other issues. And I was very critical of that propaganda because there was plenty of real atrocities that they.
So the origin of, as I understand it, the origin of the 40 babies thing was there was... What are these tangents? There was a journalist that was outside of a kibbutz, one of the kibbutzim that had been hit by Hamas, and one IDF soldier made a claim of babies, and then clarified it was like 40 babies, and then the journalist ran with the story, and then various governments were using that story as a reference. I don't think that the line about the 40 babies or whatever thing originated from the Israeli government.
You could point to, but they wanted to make it seem like...
Could be wrong about that, but I don't think I am.
That didn't mean that I was actually defending the actions that took place on October 7, but you would obviously believe that if you're a moron, or if you are trying to present a very different reality, a reality where you want to fit me into an unnuanced perspective. Now, what's ironic here is twofold. One, my mother's maiden name is Uyghur, okay? Uyghurs are Turks. They are Turkic, not the whole, like the whole world is Turk memes. I'm saying like literally, they are a Turkic people, okay?
God damn it. Once I get
that, which is why I also jokingly say I'm white Chinese, okay? But not only that, but also the Turkish government does actually train them. The Turkish government does actually train a lot of Uyghur fighters and uses them alongside the Salafist brigades that they've trained in Syria. This is real, and they do this under the watchful eye of the United States of America. This is also real. I am very familiar with the Uyghur separatist groups for this region, okay? If I can't correct misinformation with my podcast co-host without getting called a propagandist for China, then what the fuck am I supposed to do? Just let it happen? Just let him just say this? Let him.
It's not just about like correcting the record or educating your audience. Like, you took explicitly pro-Chinese positions that and the rhetoric that he's using now in this reaction is just so different from the conversation that he had with Hasan, and he's blatantly misrepresenting two different AP articles delving into the human rights violations committed against the Uyghur Muslim population in China.
Say whatever the fuck he wants. It's ridiculous. And he did this exact same thing. He did this exact same thing when I corrected his dangerous misinformation that's going to come later, where he talks about Hezbollah and the 500
dangerous misinformation
in the Syrian civil war. We'll get to that later, though.
About the human rights violations in Xinjiang.
It's the tourism hour.
To China's fury, UN accuses Beijing of Uyghur rights abuses.
Tourism hour.
Uyghur County in China has the highest prison rate in the world. 1 in 25 people is in a Chinese prison.
It's the tourism hour.
48 Uyghurs detained in Thailand
we
for
watched all
cases.
this.
Reading on this and has regurgitated it to his mainstream audience. Why is he defending China?
I wasn't, and I never have. And you're wrong.
He's skipping the tourism hour thing because he knows it looks bad. For him to be like, oh, everything's fine now, it's a tourist attraction, is so unbelievably dishonest.
For claiming that I have. Your entire premise here is that they had death camps. You did not prove that. That there was organ harvesting. You didn't prove that either. And then you turned around and said, I'm defending China. I never did. I never defended China. Not.
Why would you say it's a tourist attraction? Why would you say that? Why the fuck would you say that?
Not in any of these conversations, describing the actual horrifying conditions while also saying that they're horrifying conditions and completely unacceptable is not defending China. It's only defending China if you have a Stephen
You said it was a tourist attraction, bro.
Crowder style approach to global conflict, where you're like, wait a minute, you're offering some nuance while also still criticizing the Chinese government. You must be defending China.
This is so lame.
Side of their Muslim population. How does this even make sense? It only makes
He still hasn't, offered additional claims to this side. Now, what's really interesting about this is, and I have to talk about my second position here. There is one thing that I've maintained throughout this entire process.
Oh boy.
And that is that while Ethan on the one hand talks about how China is genocidating the Uyghur Muslims, his position on Israel genocidating the Palestinians always goes back and forth. He has sometimes called it a war.
Does it?
And sometimes offered concessions to why it truly is a genocide.
Can something be a war and genocide? Is there not such a thing as genocidal war? Is there not such a thing as a genocidal war?
Okay.
Are the two things mutually exclusive?
Hard to pin him on this position, so you have to focus on what he actually is doing whenever he talks about Israel. What kind of defenses he's engaging with respect to Israel. Is he actually offering nuance to Israel's military actions, or is he simply running defense for Israel's military actions? Okay? Because I did not defend the Chinese government's mass detention facilities. I've called it a cultural genocide before, as a matter of fact, over and over again. Now, one thing that I have to make clear here, and this is another thing that I've talked about over and over and over again. If Israel treated the Palestinian population in the same unjustifiable manner that China treated Xinjiang, Israel would get a Nobel Peace Prize every year going forward. Every Western nation would turn around and cherish how wonderful and how peaceful of a nation state Israel actually is for taming the savage, barbaric Palestinians. They would talk about how incredible Israel is for actually simply doing mass detention and mass surveillance upon the captive Palestinian population and not slaughtering them. If Israel started to do China-style mass surveillance and mass detention tomorrow on all Palestinians, both in the West Bank and also in Gaza, literally every American would be doing tricks on it. They would talk about Benjamin Netanyahu being the most peaceful person on the planet. Okay? So think about what it takes for people to say China is doing death camps and has an exterminationist principle and doing organ harvesting, as opposed to how much it takes for people to even come to terms with the genocide that Israel is committing. China never bombed entire city blocks. China never shut off humanitarian aid. As a matter of fact, one of the most ironic statements throughout this entire process was the fact that China was also still committed to developing Xinjiang as it is everywhere else, including in Tibet as well. But the American perspective on this has always been they are trying to develop these areas to continue destroying them, to continue killing them. There was literally an association.
There was a systemic effort to destroy the culture. A systemic effort to destroy the Uyghur Muslim culture. And it worked.
A press article that I read talking about a high-speed rail line going all the way to Xinjiang, basically creating this massive network of high-speed rail that was seen as a negative, that was portrayed as a negative thing. People in Xinjiang still have freedom to travel in that regard, okay? Under the hukou system, which needs desperate reform, there are obviously limitations to travel and how much you can, internally travel inside of China. But many of these people that are criticizing me don't even know what the f that.
I don't even know what the point of bringing up the infrastructure is. Like, why would you? Oh, they're building, trains in the Xinjiang region. Okay. I don't understand. Where are you going with that?
That is anyway. And they're now going to Google it and be like, Hasan didn't bring this up or talk about the severity of the structure. Okay.
Like, and? Okay.
So one must ask the question, why Ethan Klein refuses to actually engage in any of the things that I'm saying, uses out of context clips, and also simultaneously has a very different standard for what China is doing as opposed to what Israel is doing. Okay?
What is this double standard that he's talking about? What is this double standard? What is he talking about? Did Ethan Ethan has called it a genocide as far as I understand the whole time? Like, I'm pretty sure.
What the f***'s going on here? It doesn't make any sense. I'm actually morally consistent on this process. He's the one who's not.
You are wildly inconsistent and dishonest.
Isn't Israel's activity in between lawn mowings essentially what China does in its worst moments? Exactly. That's why I brought that up. If China did what Israel did to Xinjiang, we would nuke China. Okay? Understand something. If China did what Israel did to the Palestinians in Xinjiang, we would nuke China tomorrow. And if Israel did what China did in Xinjiang as a part of its like rehabilitation or re-education vocational training campaign or whatever the Chinese government calls it, they would consider that to be a pathway towards infinite peace. Can you imagine where Palestinians will now have freedom of travel into other parts of Israel, into greater Israel, mass detention and the subsequent re-education inside of these like supposed vocational training schools or whatever, but then in the aftermath of that they have full-blown citizenship and access to the same resources? That would never happen in a million years. Netanyahu would get a Nobel Peace Prize. Netanyahu would get every single Nobel Peace Prize for the rest of time. Also, speaking of organ harvesting, I mean that's but that's besides the point.
Sense if A, he's being paid, or B, he has the political complexities of a 5-year-old. I know America bad is a meme that people laugh at online, but with Hasan, this does actually seem to be the beginning and the end of his analysis.
2 principles. Let me explain to you. 2 principles that you should keep with you.
Yeah, so this is a classic. This is something that I hear mostly from Sex Pestany and his orbiters.
Oh, dear.
But the idea that like my commentary on political matters is simply reduced to America bad is incredibly, incredibly dumb. It's ironic that this is
what is up with Twitch's player? I hit pause saying, and it just doesn't pause.
Is just literally America bad. At no point, if I simply stated America bad over and over and over again, how the f would I fill 8 hours of space every goddamn day? Why is it that these people never actually make the argument America good? Why is it that these people never actually dive deeper into why I say America bad, for example? And this is, once again, obviously a reductive clip out of context where I'm describing a complex position. Let's take a look.
Coming from a person who's Turkish, okay? When you look at a situation in the Middle East, you look at what the local government is and who the Western forces are. Never align with the Western forces. So when
he's calling this out of context, but I mean, Hasan believes this. He believes this, right? He believes that in any given conflict, you figure out who the Western aligned powers are, and then you oppose that entity, whatever, government or military or whatever. That is his position. His position is unironically America bad. That's what he said. There's no extra context here. I don't even think he would deny this.
I look at other countries, I look at the regional actor, whoever the regional power player is, and then I look at who is backed by the Western superpowers. That's a principle that you could take home with you if you want to actually be moral, or if you want to be.
He's calling that a principle. That's a pretty precise word. A principle implies like consistency, something that is consistently applied throughout your life or throughout any kind of philosophy that you have. If it's a principle, then it's like it's an underpinning of the things that you believe. And his principle is more specifically not America bad, but like West bad. That's his position.
Be smart about the way.
As I've said before, time and time again, okay, from both my own personal experiences and I'm Turkish, okay? Turkey is a NATO nation. Turkey is the way that it is specifically because Turkey is a NATO nation. Do you understand? And in that process, during the Cold War, because it was supposed to be a bulwark against the growing socialist movement in the country, they actually suppressed Kurdish liberation movements, socialist movements, trade unionist movements. The American government, by way of the CIA, created a right-wing ultranationalist paramilitary, the MHP party. Okay, the MHP party, the Grey Wolves. This, you know how Ethan's community will call me out for like, oh, he did this. He's actually secretly a Turkish ultranationalist. You can only arrive at that position if you're a moron. I have, again, countless hours of talking about the history of the MHP party and how the CIA did an Operation Gladio like they did in Italy, but in Turkey with the MHP ultranationalist paramilitary groups that they violently sent to.
Am I sure? Are you asking me if I'm sure if I'm on the left? Send me a political compass test and I'll take it live on stream. We can find out together.
Destroy any sort of trade unionist, socialist, or workers' movement. Many of those movements comprised of Kurds that wanted their own version of Kurdish liberation movements, as a matter of fact. MHP was responsible for that. MHP is still a part of the governing coalition alongside the AKP in Turkey right now. The ultra-nationalist fascists are still in power in this country, in my country. Okay?
Are you sure you're on the left? You're criticizing Hasan. What is this? What is this logic?
There's more. I wanted to.
Are you aware that Hasan advocates for Palestinians and you're criticizing him? Hello? Guys?
There's more I wanted to get into. Bro, you're making this unwatchable. I know. Context and nuance is silly.
Way you analyze other countries, that's one basic principle that you can take home with you. All of a sudden, magically, you are above on your foreign policy analysis. You're going to be better off than 90% of people that look at the situation.
After seeing all of this, I was already getting uncomfortable with our partnership. I started to wonder if I had...
Also, I don't think he saw any of this. He didn't see any of this. He already arrived at the position that I was bad after an entire year of shitting on me with snide remarks as I was actively defending him in the process. For all the foot soldiers that are in here to see the other side of this story for once, welcome. Okay, I have an 8-minute compilation that he couldn't even sit through where I was defending Ethan Klein, including, this is, I guess, from what, January 11th, 2024. Ethan was hitting me with snide remarks over and over and over again while I was simultaneously defending him. Okay? I was simultaneously defending him from people that kept bringing him up and saying like, oh, he said this, he said that. I didn't want to be focusing on drama. Okay? I did not want to entertain the drama perverts because I thought it was irrelevant what Ethan Klein was saying because I assumed that he was just doing goofs and gaffes. In any case, we'll get to that in a little bit as well. Okay, the entire premise here so far in the 9 minutes and 39 seconds that we watched is that Ethan is saying Hasan Piker groomed me, a 40-year-old man with the political convictions of a...
That's not what he said. He said you hid your power level. What Ethan said was that he essentially hid his power level a bit during the first like year and a half, I guess, of their podcast. I don't know how long they did the podcast or whatever. And that after a certain amount of time, Ethan began to notice that Hasan was a lot more extreme than maybe he had originally thought, which I think Hasan, are there not clips of Hasan himself espousing this strategy of like extolling the benefits of this strategy to present yourself in a much more sanitized way when you're in liberal spaces? Like, I feel like there's clips of him just saying like, yes, that's a valid tactic or whatever.
Sea cucumber. I had no way of thinking on my own. And this 30-year-old man at the time groomed me into believing dangerous radical ideas. Dangerous radical ideas like what, you might ask? Socialism. Socialism being good. He made too many convincing arguments. He was hot and he groomed me and it scared me. It scared what happened to me. Scary man. Stupid, sexy Hasan.
What?
Any idea who this guy actually is?
And then this happened.
We have breaking news out of Israel this morning where Hamas has launched a surprise attack within Israel's borders.
Like, this is bullshit. This is a video that he made a year after our podcast ended. Okay. He developed this resentment over the course of the year. He didn't like start hearing me say these things that I was saying directly to him and see it in a different light.
I mean, that's not true. There's episodes of their podcast where they're clearly at odds with each other. This I like, why is he lying about what happened here?
This is pure narrative. Okay. Pure narrative. He's doing post hoc rationalizations. And I think the reason why he's doing these post hoc rationalizations.
They had heated debates. They had heated debates about Israel-Palestine. Like very, very heated debates.
Is because he wants to convince you, the viewer, to being like, he duped me and he was duping you with his scary, elusive, mysterious ways of doing propaganda. The real story of what took place is that in the aftermath of October 7, we had disagreements. We had significant disagreements.
It's in the video later, but we're never going to get there with his commentary.
Ethan wanted to hyper-focus on the feelings of Israelis and potentially the fears.
Is this just a Hasan reaction channel now? Technically, we're a Hasan and H3 reaction channel. And iDubbbz.
Of American Jews in the aftermath of October 7. And my argument always was hyper-focusing on the broader picture because I knew what was about to happen. Because history, contrary to what Hosbarists like to tell you, did not start on October 7, 2023. History started far before October 7. Zionism was an exterminationist, ethno-religious supremacist ideology that is identical to Nazi fascism far before October
Jesus.
7. As the Euromed Human Rights Monitor and the Save the Kids Foundation both correctly pointed to, in 2023, before October 7, 2023 was the deadliest year for children in Palestine. And before then, 2022 was the deadliest year for children in Palestine. Why was that happening to the Palestinian children? If history started on October 7, how could that have happened? How could that have happened? And the reality of the matter is, Ethan knows better. He should know better. He lived in Israel. He hated Israel. He talked about how Israel was an exterminationist, crazy country that was incredibly right-wing. In 2021, he posted an Instagram story about it, which I'm sure he'll bring up in a little bit.
Deprogram.
And so that's why I took the 101 approach, because, you know, the average American it's not just that they're starting from square one, they're starting from like square negative 30. You have to first pick apart all of the things that have been programmed into them, and then you can start to build upon a basis of reality.
You're describing the reason why so many people simultaneously consider me to be a Democratic Party mouthpiece or a suck dem or whatever the but also a threat to America as well, because I do, just like you said, I do advocate for social democratic reforms. And I do think that in order to develop any kind of mechanism of pushback, a robust labor force that has any kind of, you know, speaking power, any kind of fighting power to strike at the heart of the imperial core where value is generated, I think that in the short term, in order to combat against that, you have to advocate for a much lighter form of propaganda. Despite, you know, I perfectly understand that social democracies benefit tremendously from American imperialism, Western imperialism.
He's saying, hide your power level. Present yourself as a SOCDEM instead of a full-on tanky communist or whatever. And that way you can plant the seed of class consciousness. And here he is in this reaction, basically gaslighting about like Ethan's correct assessment of how he behaved on their podcast.
Bit to show his bona fides as to why he's so pro-Palestinian.
Overnight.
After the shock of October 7th, I noticed a huge increase of anti-Semitic comments from Hasan's stream and Discord, including from his head mod. I was disturbed that Hasan...
Yeah, let's see what these anti-Semitic comments are, okay? Now, remember, there's a lot of story making happening here, okay? There's a lot of story making happening here to make it seem as though, you know, I just showed a very different reality, or I duped this 40-year-old man into, I don't know, dangerous radical ideas. And I actually radicalized his audience, not realizing that his audience actually radicalized on their own. They were radicalized by the reality. Many people in his audience, including many people in my audience, were completely oblivious to the horrifying practice of apartheid and that Israel was doing before October 7. October 7 was an act that made a lot of people in the United States of America pay attention to it, okay? And they organically started realizing that the statements coming from Ethan Klein were actually at odds with how they felt about the situation. Now, is it because they were becoming anti-Semitic?
Which statements specifically is he talking about?
No, it's because they started recognizing the reality of Israel's occupation and genocidal practices. So when Israel was doing, which Ethan, again, goes back and forth on, sometimes he thinks it's other times he thinks it's a war. His wife certainly doesn't seem to think so. Hila, who was a soldier in the Israeli occupying force, which again, as I talked about in our debate, where Ethan admitted that she could be considered a terrorist, by the way, her statements on this are even more right-wing than Ethan's, okay? There's always a steady push and pull here. And of course, his audience, organically, a progressive audience that he had cultivated, not because of leftovers, but even like the girly pops that wanted to care about the goofs and gaffs, obviously started recognizing that some of the stuff that Ethan was saying was damn near identical to...
Yes, something can be both genocide and war. Genocide often occurs alongside armed conflict, as seen in the Armenian genocide, Jewish Holocaust, and others. Genocide is defined as the intentional destruction of people It is often linked to war. For example, the Armenian genocide, Jewish Holocaust, and others were committed alongside armed conflicts. A definition of a genocide is blah, blah, blah. We already.
What Ben Shapiro was saying, or what Charlie Kirk was saying.
Like the fact that Ethan at times has described this as a war and a genocide, but you're going to go after him for not exclusively using the word genocide is such unbelievably silly purity testing. He called it a genocide. You have a dual citizen Israeli calling what Israel is doing a genocide, and you want to browbeat because he's called it a war at other times?
Or what any number of right-wing commentators were saying about Israel. One of the moments that was majorly consequential is the moment that Ethan actually decided to no longer, when Ethan decided to no longer be on Twitter. Part of the reason why he left Twitter, now he says, is because of all of the anti-Semitism, and there was plenty of anti-Semitism on Twitter after Elon's takeover, so there is a plausible deniability there. But the reason why he left Twitter was because...
Plausible deniability? The f*** does he mean by that? Anti-Semitism exploded on Twitter after Elon took over. Everybody knows this. We've all seen the posts. What does he mean plausible deniability?
Because he couldn't deal with the fact that he kept wanting to say something, okay? He kept wanting to say something about Israel, and it was always in defense of Israel, okay?
Really? It was always in defense of Israel? We've never seen clips of him being critical of Israel? Why do you guys lie about this? I say you guys. I'm looking at Ogre Boy. Like, what is with this continual insistence on lying about what Ethan has said throughout the conflict? He's been highly critical of Israel the entire time. The entire time.
That famous moment is, and I'm sure someone can bring it up for me right now, that famous moment is when he looked at Mark Barg and his post, a Muslim sex worker, an Iranian Muslim sex worker, who he said, this is it. This was the moment.
This guy, bro, has said that he said the most unhinged shit. Do I need to pull up some of his tweets? His name is Margbar America. This is the guy that he's talking about right here. Here's just an example that I just randomly found here. Okay, so here, hold on. He's quote retweeted somebody saying leftists be like, and he's quote retweeted as saying every day should be October 7. I don't see the problem. This is the guy that he's talking about. This is the guy that Ethan quote retweeted and said Hamas would kill you, enjoy your sex work and drugs or whatever. This is the guy who he's talking about. I don't see the problem. Killing civilians and random people will help no one. Yeah, it's really sad that Israel did that to their own people instead of letting Hamas take prisoners of war. Do you think Hamas had helicopters shoot? This is their conspiracy theory that all the citizens that died, all the civilians that died on October 7th were actually killed by Israel as a part of their Hannibal directive, which is a policy that they've employed at certain times of, I think, intentionally killing hostages so that they couldn't be used as bargaining chips. I don't know. It's some crazy policy. But then leftists turn around and said that all the civilians that died on October 7th were killed by Israel themselves. Like, this guy's fully unhinged. He's like the Z Squirrel person, like on that level of unhinged. Like, it's obviously unhinged to say that every day should be October 7th. What do you think he means by that? Like Bad Empanada unhinged. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. And so Ethan says, enjoy your sex, drugs and being a sex worker. Hamas would kill you on the spot. And they want to tone police Ethan in this spot? Really? Are you fucking serious? Okay.
Literally no different than what Israel defenders say. The idea that you can't show solidarity to a people that are being ethnically cleansed is ridiculous. The idea that you cannot show...
Okay, yeah. So, like, this is that dishonest, wildly dishonest framing that we were just talking about. Ethan did not dunk on this guy for showing solidarity with Palestinian people. Ethan dunked on this guy because the guy was fully unhinged about October 7th. Fully unhinged. Had nothing to do with this guy being in solidarity with Palestinian people. And it had everything to do with this guy openly celebrating what Hamas did on October 7th. This is so dishonest. He's such a Weasley liar.
Show solidarity to the Palestinians because you have fantasized that those Palestinians would be homophobic and kill you and viciously kill you.
Oh my God. Oh my God, you guys. it's controversial to say that Gaza has some antiquated views on homosexuals. Okay.
Is ridiculous. Even if that was
Or
the case,
Hamas, rather?
You could still show solidarity to people, even if they were homophobic, even if they were anti-sex work. Yeah, I know. A lot of people in underdeveloped nations that have been victim of colonial exploitation do not have the same woke mindset that we do here in the Western world. Okay? That doesn't change this dynamic at all. I still don't think they should be destroyed. I still don't think that their lives should be ruined, as a matter of fact.
I mean, neither does Ethan. What's your point?
No one deserves genocide, period. It doesn't matter if their opinions are not aligned with mine. This is simply trying to engage in the act of pink washing. It's also a conflation between ISIS and Hamas.
How? What?
Hamas is a militant organization that was designed under the rulership of the oppressive Israeli apartheid regime. Hamas's tactics have
How many buzzwords can we fit in one sentence here?
evolved throughout time and become more radical. Hamas's tactics have become more violent throughout time, but that violence is still maintained. The standard of violence is still maintained by the colonial power in this process, which would be Israel.
I don't even know what the that means.
Because Israel has gotten more and more violent throughout time. That's why the cliche here is that the first intifada was fought with stones and work stoppages, and the second intifada was still relatively peaceful, but there were bus bombings on top of that. Okay, bombings at bus stations.
What? The second intifada was relatively peaceful? Was the second intifada not more violent than the first? Second intifada was 405 Palestinians dead, 256 Israelis dead. So the first intifada would have been more deadly, I think. That's a lot, though. A lot of people. During the first intifada, it was 1,200 Palestinians and 179 Israelis.
What could have taken place in between that process? Well, if you watched any number of different instances where I've talked about this issue, especially when talking with Zach Foster, a Jewish historian, an academic that has dedicated his entire life's work to Palestine and Palestinian liberation groups, you would know why the Palestinian militancy has become more violent throughout this process, because Israel has become infinitely more violent in its colonial occupation.
To be fair, there has been an escalation of violence on both sides for decades.
Why did he even attack this guy? I think he probably said something like "Death to America" or something. I don't know.
Nope, he was openly celebrating October 7th.
He was wilding out on the timeline.
Wilding out by praising Hamas. That's what he was doing.
Okay. There's more to this though. He had a back and forth. Does anyone have that? Do you guys have the back and forth that took
There
place?
is more to it. Please find it.
On his ideology here.
Please find it. Yes.
Yeah, I stopped using Twitter to protest Elon. No, you stopped using Twitter because you couldn't handle the backlash of your racist-ass comments. There was a queer Muslim content creator. Do you think we forgot?
Let's see what he is labeling as like homophobic here.
I stopped using Twitter to protest Elon. No, you stopped using Twitter because you couldn't handle the backlash of your racist-ass comments. There was a queer Muslim content creator. Do you think we forgot?
Hello? This is a queer Muslim content creator and you're criticizing this person? Hello? Ethan says, I'm the freaking ghoul, and yet here you are still refusing to criticize Hamas. I haven't killed any children or families or burned anyone alive lately. But who is the freaking ghoul? Why do you have harsher words for me than Hamas? And then this guy says, was it hard to type that bullshit with one hand jerking off to the thought of queer Muslims being murdered? What? This dude was celebrating October 7th. Fully celebrating it. You can scroll through his timeline and just search for Hamas and you'll see the post. It was unhinged. But this idea that he's going after him because he's a queer Muslim content creator, or he can't criticize him because he's a queer Muslim content creator, is fucking insane.
You are a ghoul, freak. I'm the freak and ghoul, yet here you are still refusing to criticize Hamas. I haven't killed any families or burned anyone alive lately. Who's the freak and the ghoul? Why do you have harsher words for me than Hamas? Was it hard to type that bullshit with one hand jerking off to the thought of queer Muslims being murdered? Bro, what the I'm fully in your corner. What was wrong? What was I wrong about? This is the revolution you're supporting, right? Just don't go anywhere near Hamas because your life would 100% be in danger. Am I wrong genuinely? The idea that, once again, every single person involved in whether it's affairs of civil governance or involved in militancy against the state of Israel is a barbaric monster that will burn your ass on the spot is ridiculous. And he hasn't changed from this perspective because he literally said
about me going to Gaza potentially, right, was when I was working alongside Jeremy Scahill to try to apply pressure to the Egyptian government during the brief period of ceasefire, to open up the Rafah crossing so Western media could actually go into the Gaza Strip, which Israel obviously never allowed, and then Israel destroyed the entire ceasefire anyway. In that process, he kept saying if he goes to Gaza, he'll be a high-profile target for Hamas. Why the would they do that? If Hamas was in the business of kidnapping any random non-Palestinian that happens to be inside of Gaza, they would have kidnapped a shit ton of the aid workers. Except those aid workers were, once again, just like I was concerned about my own safety and well-being, those aid workers were killed by Israel, not Hamas, like the World Central Kitchen aid workers that were killed by Israel. They were there under the watchful gaze of Jose Andres. They were working alongside the Israeli government. Is
he talking about that? There was something like really bad that happened like 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago or something like that. The IDF rolled up and just started opening fire on that was horrible. That was very bad.
Israeli government brought World Central Kitchen to the Gaza Strip to show the world, to disprove the narrative by their estimation that they were not letting humanitarian aid flow into the Gaza Strip. So they worked with Jose Andres, a very famous chef, a very famous activist chef, and his group, World Central Kitchen. And what did they do? What did they do in that process? Because they had created killing fields, their Israeli occupying force commanders lasered the World Central Kitchen aid workers. So yes, the major fear here is not Hamas in terms of going into the Gaza Strip. It's Israel. And the reason why I bring this up is because Ethan still doesn't recognize that. He still, to this day, does not recognize that. He still thinks it's like Hamas is the barbaric, violent force and not Israel. Israel is a far greater evil in the region than Hamas ever could be. This is the truth. That's it. There is plenty of evidence to showcase this truth.
The death toll is certainly higher on the Israeli side, but like, is Ogre Boy in here? Because I have a question for Ogre Boy.
This is just the reality.
Okay.
It's an observed.
Okay, Ogre Boy. A magical genie shows up at your house or your apartment or wherever. A magical genie shows up and says, you have two choices and you have to take one of these choices. Otherwise, I will make a choice for you. You have to live in a country ruled by the Israeli government, or you have to live in a country ruled by Hamas. What do you choose? And this is supposed to make some point. Well, he just said that Israel was a greater evil. If we're doing just straight body count, that's one thing. I think there are other things to consider as well. I think we all know the answer to that question.
Observable reality that you cannot deny. Okay? That's it. If you are a lesser evil voter and you want...
Literally everybody in this chat is picking one of those governments, and we all know who we were talking about here.
To vote for Kamala Harris, for example, because of the lesser evil voting that you wanted to engage in, then you should be a lesser evil voter and vote for Hamas as opposed to Israel in this process.
I would not.
It's not on October 7 to the...
I would not make that same choice.
Entire Palestinian population.
What the fuck is the point of that question? What do you think the point of that question is? What do you think the point of that question is?
Over and over again for the past 16 months.
Yeah, put it together.
So much more power than Hamas has ever had. And it has used that power for true evil, for death and destruction. It's ridiculous. There is no moral playing field here, but even if the moral playing field was even, just looking at the sheer casualty numbers and the percentage of who Israel has targeted and who Israel has killed versus who Hamas targeted and who Hamas killed, the numbers on the board reflect...
I'm not criticizing Palestinian civilians. I'm criticizing Hamas.
The very different reality that does not make Israel look good. Is what Ethan is saying is true? No, it's not. He's doing the ISIS conflation, saying that like Hamas would throw you off the roofs or whatever. And by the way, before people turn around and say, oh my God, well, Hasan, what do you say to this? Hamas has executed this gay person or whatever. First and foremost, let me explain to you how that process works, as I explained to Ethan as well in our leftovers conversation. As a matter of fact, the last one that we had in the studio, Israel will blackmail and extort gay, queer Palestinians.
Homosexuality in Palestine is considered a taboo subject. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people experience persecution and violence. There's a significant legal divide between the West Bank and Gaza Strip, with the former having more progressive laws and the latter having more conservative laws. Shortly after the Jordanian annexation of the West Bank in 1950, same-sex acts were blah, 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 blah. Scholar Tamia Spitka stated that in Gaza, coming out is a death sentence because police do not act against queerphobic violence. Domestic violence is not criminalized, and civil society organizations which protect women and children are reported to be vulnerable to attack. Spitka added in a related article that this vulnerability has been exploited by Israel, noting that a connection between the Israeli occupation, lack of security, and protection for women and non-heterosexual people and the lack of rule of law. In 2019, Haaretz interviewed 4 gay men and 1 gay woman living in Gaza who recounted their experiences. One man recounted his rough treatment by Hamas members, while others said, they feared being arrested, outed, and then forced into heterosexual marriages by their families. All 4 said that social media was a game changer in meeting other LGBTQ individuals, but some feared catfishing by undercover Hamas or Israeli intelligence agents. Gay men who flirt with Israeli soldiers on dating apps worry about being catfished by Hamas's security services. Some interpretations of Palestinian law say that it does not outlaw consensual gay sex between adults. Anis F. Qasim, editor-in-chief of the Palestinian Yearbook of International Law, said that Palestinian law, even in Gaza, could be interpreted as allowing non-commercial sex between consenting adult men. There you go. That's the Wikipedia.
With compromising footage in order to turn them into collaborators. And in that process, and this has been the same practice for every resistance group, every resistance group throughout history, whether it be the IRA, which implemented the practice of kneecapping, or whether it be the ANC, which implemented the practice of putting tires around the necks of collaborators and lighting them on fire, a practice called necklacing. Okay, Hamas, when they find collaborators that are working alongside Israel, will execute them. This isn't appropriate. I don't think it's appropriate, but that is the reason. It's no different than what the IRA did. Shooting someone's kneecaps. That's where the term kneecap comes from, by the way, the band kneecap. And that's precisely what the ANC, supposedly under the watchful, humanitarian, peaceful, pacifist gaze of Nelson Mandela, did in terms of necklacing, putting a rubber tire around someone's neck and lighting it on fire for the crime of collaborating with the apartheid government.
I'm not sure Nelson Mandela approved of that. And it might have happened when he was in prison. Nelson Mandela did not approve of necklacing, which was a method of extrajudicial. He's such a liar! Is he just ignorant or is he lying about this shit, dude? He said during the debate with Ethan last week that, I'm sorry, was that earlier? No, last week, that he claimed that Nelson Mandela bombed a church. He corrected himself sort of immediately after that, but he implied that Nelson Mandela directed. Hey, thanks so much for the raid. Basically implied that Nelson Mandela directed the bombing of a church while he was in prison. Number one, he did not direct that bombing. Number two, the bombing was on Church Street. They didn't bomb a church. Did they bomb a church? Actually, they might have, to be honest with you. There was a Church Street bombing. Yes, the ANC bombed a church. Okay, there we go. It was a church, but it wasn't indiscriminate. But anyways, Nelson Mandela did not approve of necklacing, which was a method of extrajudicial execution used during the apartheid era in South Africa. The ANC, the political party Mandela led, condemned necklacing as an extreme and inhumane method of punishment for collaborators.
Kneecap comes from, by the way, the band Kneecap. And that's precisely what the ANC, supposedly under the watchful, humanitarian, peaceful, pacifist gaze of Nelson Mandela, did.
He's such a liar. Like, he's so clearly implying that Nelson Mandela was okay with necklacing. He just lies about this stuff so much, bro.
In terms of necklacing, putting a rubber tire around someone's neck and lighting it on fire for the crime of collaborating with the apartheid government.
Him and his wife disagreed on the lengths of violence that they were willing to go to. There was a divide between he and his wife, but he nor the, apparently, according to this cursory Google search, neither he nor the ANC broadly approved of necklacing. Mandela spoke at a conference in Gaza. Find that clip and quote. Which quote do you mean? He was a tireless advocate for Palestinians. He was a tireless supporter of Yasser Arafat and the PLO. He was a tireless advocate for Palestinians who have their own separate state. And at the same time, he was a tireless defender of Israel's right to exist within secure borders. He recognized the validity, the sovereignty, the self-determination of Israel. Just to be clear about that.
Was seemingly okay with this.
Can you do you care that your chat is calling me racist? Do you make any attempt to modify?
I have not looked at my chat.
Moderate that at all?
I have not looked at my chat at all, but you.
I just opened it, but don't you have moderators? Do you care at all about what your audience says about me?
Yeah, this is, I think, probably the most honest criticism that Ethan has here. Okay, which is that his feelings are hurt. His feelings are hurt because he's saying things to an audience that has a higher political acumen than he does. And that audience is obviously tuned into the frequency of right-wing reactionary propaganda. So, of course, they immediately hear some of the words that are taking place in this conversation, which, by the way, more informative than this context nuke. If you want to understand Ethan's actual framework and actual perspective on this, on the matter, you go back and rewatch that debate that we did. Okay. This debate all the way in like the 17th of October, 2023. I believe that's when we had that conversation, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. But yes, of course, when they hear you say things that are in defense of Israel and engage in racist tropes and racist stereotyping and acting as though
there's a guy in his chat who was in his chat at this time named Sin of Marxism. He wants to debate me next Tuesday evening. And I said, yes.
So, and acting as though like Hamas is ISIS, for example, then yeah, of course people are going to say you're being racist. Hasan, you're literally playing into Ethan's hands with this. Don't speak positively of a literal fascist group, a fascist terrorist group. What the are you saying? Hamas is also right-wing and reactionary, though. We don't need to support them. What is the support here? I'm not saying, oh my God, it's amazing. It's the greatest liberation group that has ever existed. But what are you supposed to do? Who is supposed to rise up in arms against a nation state that is a settler colonial entity?
This is such a stupid argument. Such a stupid argument. He's making this argument of like Hamas is basically inevitable, but we have examples throughout history of resistance groups that did not like deliberately target civilians. And like just because Hamas represents the resistance against Israelis and Israel like subjugation, it doesn't mean that you have to like hand it to them. It doesn't, you don't have to do that. I personally think that Hamas has been a fucking catastrophe for Palestinians in Gaza. They've been awful. Like actually awful. Spending hundreds of millions of dollars on weapons and building up like a military infrastructure and constantly lobbing like rockets into Israeli like civilian populations. Does anybody in chat think that Israel would have invaded and occupied Gaza? Like imagine if Hamas had just stopped firing rockets. Just stopped firing rockets.
Doing a genocide. Don't you feel like it's a little suspicious that you constantly are railing against people who are fighting against the genocide? What the are people supposed to do? What would you do? This is a reality that former Israeli Shin Bet leaders also
like maybe don't do the and like the indiscriminate killing. That's kind of and that's what Ethan said throughout their conversation. Like Hasan kept on asking him like, what would you do? Since that kind of resistance is unacceptable, what would you do? And Ethan repeated himself like dozens of times, like, don't target civilians. Don't target civilians.
Recognize this is a reality that Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel, also recognized when he said, if I was on the other side of that Gaza fence, I would join Hamas.
You can recognize why circumstances lead to people being more you can understand like why young men are being radicalized in Gaza. That's not difficult to understand. And like when I'm critical of Hamas, I'm not even necessarily critical of like I think the men who have been indoctrinated into that belief structure have been victims themselves. It's the leadership structure that I have a big problem with. Number one, because they're insane and they want to rule the country with like strict Islamic law, which as a fan of like multicultural democracy, like liberal democracy and like freedom and human rights, their version of governance like horrifies me. Just I imagine living under that kind of a structure and it's horrifying. The human rights violations, horrifying. Like what do you think happens if you stand on a street corner in Gaza holding up a sign saying, you know, goddamn Hamas or whatever? But I understand like why even the people that did this stuff on October 7th, like even them, I understand like it would be easier to radicalize someone if they've been the victim of brutal Israeli occupation or control with the blockade and everything. You make a terrorist group like Hamas, you make their job easier when you treat Palestinians the way that Israelis have for the last like 20 years. All that's fine, but you can recognize that and at the same time just be like, Hamas, unequivocally Hamas, I pray for their downfall.
Of course you would. What the do you mean? What is this expectation that people are supposed to be perfect victims after 76 years of colonial occupation? It is crazy. He said this yesterday. You're 100% right.
About actually wanting to understand the situation in a way where we humanize everybody, where we can actually create a lasting peace, one that's not built on like hate. So yeah, no, Hila's not a terrorist. Somebody who's like, I want to join the Houthis so that I can, or I want to join Hamas so I can like suicide bomb a cafe. That's it.
Israel's defense minister paid a visit to Palestinians will be suicide bombers who failed their missions in an effort to try and understand what motivates them. Benjamin Ben Elizer's conclusion, they are driven by despair. While condemning the act, Ben Elizer said he felt compassion for one bomber, a young woman who, in a fit of grief over her boyfriend's death, volunteered to go on a suicide mission. The minister, a moderate in Ariel Sharon's hawkish government, said as soon as Palestinians can realize the dream of a normal life, they will say no to anyone who tries to convince to choose death over life. Stanley Cohen, a lawyer who represented Hamas activists.
Jesus, that LSF clip is kind of blowing up, guys. Jesus Christ.
Presented a very different vision of recent history. He portrayed a powerful and vicious Israel that has indiscriminately killed many thousands of innocent Palestinians. Hamas is not a group, but a nationalist resistance force. Nationalist resistance forced the resort.
They're a terrorist group. You specifically target civilians. I think most people agree on the definition of terrorism, right? Like, do we all kind of somewhat agree that the definition of terrorism is indiscriminate acts of violence exacted on a civilian population for the purpose of advancing some political or religious goal? That's generally what people think of when they think of like a terrorist group. And to the extent that any instance that you can find of Israel or IDF soldiers intentionally targeting civilians, yes, that would be an example of terrorism. Yes, whatever examples you want to give. Yes, that would be terrorism. That would be an act of terrorism. If Hamas had targeted valid government and military locations on October 7th and directed their violence towards the goal of sabotage, would we even be having this conversation right now? No, we would not be having this conversation right now. It wouldn't have escalated to the point that it is now. If those were valid military targets, would you call the IDF terrorists? I mean, kind of, yeah. Like at this point, kind of. The extent of the damage, the extent of the bombing, yeah, I think I would feel comfortable calling IDF terrorists at this point. Crazy. That level of destruction is crazy. And especially now that they're blocking aid trucks from getting in, that's insane. It's totally unacceptable. Now, like, I don't think that their drone operators or the people that are firing their rockets are just like, you know, closing their eyes and going eeny, miny, mo, and just randomly picking like buildings to bomb. I don't think that's what's going on. And at the same time, they want people like me, people, the outside world or whatever, to just accept that they're being like super precise with their bombing. I don't know how you can say that at this point when like 90% of the buildings have been destroyed. It's, you know, maybe every single time they dropped a bomb, it was from very precise intelligence. But like, I have questions about the way that they evaluate the veracity of intelligence. I have questions about the way that they go about like determining whether or not there's a credible fear that there or assertion that there are like terrorists in that building. It's a lot to ask in the face of that level of destruction. So if you called IDF terrorist, I don't think I would have an issue with that. It sure seems kind of terroristy.
Resort to violence because it has so little power compared with Israel. This is something that I've described over and over again.
Ogre Boy, you linked something. I think I saw something. When was this article posted? Somewhat recently, right? No, it was 8 months ago. Israel deliberately blocked humanitarian aid to Gaza. 2 government bodies concluded. Anthony Blinken rejected them. Yeah, the Biden administration ran way too much cover for Israel. That was bad. I think Biden's Israel policy was for sure the darkest blemish on his record. I think that was the worst thing he did during his presidency. Now you want to browbeat me because I said blemish? It was atrocious. How about that? It was atrocious. The leeway that he gave Netanyahu and Israel, especially in the first like 6 months, was way too much. Way too much. Now, you could argue that one of the ways that they were able to, or one of the reasons why they were able to, at various times, exert influence over Israel. I'll give you a couple examples. Number one, allowing humanitarian aid into the country. That happened because of Biden. And number two, was it Rafah? Was Rafah that one city that was it was a huge civilian center? And Israel had announced that they were going to do their like final military campaign into Rafah to like finish up Hamas. Was that Rafah? Okay. Rafah had, I think at the time, like 1 million civilians that were packed into like a relatively small urban area. And Israel announced that they were going to go in and finish the job. Like there's 2 more cells, there's 2 more Hamas cells, and we're going to go in there and finish the job. And the Biden administration said, no, you're not until you evacuate the civilians. You cannot justify a military operation of going into Rafah without letting civilians out first. The death toll will be too high. And you know what happened? They relocated them. Over the course of like 3 or 4 weeks, they put off the invasion for like 3 or 4 weeks. So these are 2 examples of the Biden administration exerting influence in a really good way during that conflict. You could argue that the reason why they were able to successfully pressure Israel at various times to do various things like accept temporary ceasefires and allow humanitarian aid and allow for civilians to leave Rafah, the reason why they were able to do that is because they weren't out there calling like Netanyahu a war criminal and blah, 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 blah. You could make that argument. Even if you made that argument, I would still say that it was a mistake for Biden to use the kid gloves with Netanyahu in the way that he did. And I think Netanyahu humiliated him after the election, humiliated him. Shortly after Trump was inaugurated, there was a public Oval Office meeting with Netanyahu, and he was, he humiliated Biden. Even though Biden was probably like the guy who had his back the most in the world. So I don't agree with that decision. I don't think it was good. I think it was, unfortunately, I think like Biden's wildly impressive legislative track record is not going to be the thing that people remember him for. It's going to be him basically losing us the election and his Israel policy. I think that's what people are going to think about when they look back on his presidency.
This is the primary difference between Hamas and ISIS. ISIS is a better analog for Israel than it is for Hamas. The only thing that you can point to with respect to ISIS and Hamas is the fact that they're both Muslim and scary to you. Hamas is a national resistance group. In terms of their own personal opinions, yes, some are right-wing reactionary, certainly, okay? But the goal is emancipation. If there was no occupation, there would be no Hamas. It's that simple. Do you understand?
That's someone who's like, yeah, and they're like, yeah, I want to be a terrorist. I am a terrorist. You know what I mean? Could you argue that like the IDF commits acts of terror? Yeah. You know what I mean? For sure. But
yeah. By the way, I actually talked to Ethan about this in this very same conversation, but he clearly did not listen. In this conversation that I had with Ethan, we discussed the subject of Hamas and anti-Semitism within Hamas, where I said, are there anti-Semites within the ranks of Hamas? Of course there are. There are anti-Semites everywhere.
Oh my God. My God, dude. It is a feature. It's not a bug. Anti-Semitism is a feature of Hamas. It is baked into their ideology. It's true that they came out with an updated charter in 2017, but that was after significant pressure placed on them by their allies like Qatar. And the point of them sanitizing their charter was an attempt to gain more legitimacy. It was also coming off the heels of Trump being inaugurated, and they knew that Trump was going to be super pro-Israel and wasn't going to give any consideration to the plight of Palestinians in Gaza. So they were trying to like reform their image a little bit in 2017. But if you look at their original charter, it's pretty obvious that the origin of Hamas was rooted in anti-Jewishness, not just anti-Zionism, anti-Jewishness. So he's like, oh, you can probably find some anti-Semites within the ranks of Hamas. Wild.
everywhere. Having said that, the broader goals of Hamas and all Palestinian resistance and all Palestinian militancy is an end to the occupation. So Palestinians can be free, so they can be a sovereign state, so the Palestinians no longer have to worry about drones hanging over their heads. And
I wouldn't say that Palestinians are going to be free if Hamas is like in charge of their government. Doesn't sound very free to me.
Mass surveillance and death and destruction. That's it. 32,000 people in here right now.
I'm just trying to tell you guys how it feels. And I'm shocked that you don't care that people in your chat are saying, who the is this child cold, arrogant,
Ethan,
as fuck.
I love you, but there's only so much I can do.
How can you be surprised when your Discord is literally full of
Ethan, I love you, but there's only so much I can do if you're making that argument. You know that, right? Like
Hasan's chat.
Let's see what argument he was making. Does anyone have the clip? Let's see what argument he was making that caused people to respond that way. I want to see. Because my statement there is, listen, as much as I try to moderate my community, of course, if your output is insane, of course chat is going to respond to that by going, what the is this arrogant asshole saying? I don't know if this was right before or,
get ready for the most anodyne take you could possibly imagine. Here we go.
Right after he implied that anti-Zionist Jews are capos or not. But I'm going to try to find the clip real quick. And if you guys can help me find the exact moment where he was complaining right there. And
he didn't call, he wasn't like directly comparing anti-Zionist Jews with capos. We've all seen that clip, right? It's not what he was saying.
What led to the chat response?
He's saying like in any conflict, you can find people on the fringes who believe something that is like outside of the norm. It's just the truth that the vast majority of Jewish people in the world consider Israel to be an important part of their belief, I think is the way that poll was phrased. I'm thinking of a specific poll, but there's plenty of polls to demonstrate that, like, generally speaking, Jewish people in the world are largely pro-Israel. And Hasan said, well, what about, like Jews for Peace or some group or something like that, was an anti-Zionist group or whatever. And Ethan said, well, I mean, there were capos during World War II, but he wasn't saying like these people are akin to capos. He's just saying like you can find alternative viewpoints in any conflict.
We can maybe manage through. We can maybe look through the reasons as to why his feelings got hurt. That's right. It was because he was complaining about from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, saying, well, according to Jews, it actually is a scary statement. To which I responded with, hey, Ethan, you understand Black Lives Matter. You ask white people what Black Lives Matter.
Let's do the test again. Let's do the Ogre Boy test. Ogre Boy. No, let's not do that. It's fine.
Means right-wing white people will tell you, well, Black Lives Matter is a scary slogan. So if you can understand why...
These are in no way are these two things the same thing. Like, from the river to the sea is a geographical reference to a very specific slice of the earth, Like, we are referencing a very specific region on the planet Earth when we say from the river to the sea. And his buddy Norm Finkelstein even said it was a bad phrase because it is vague enough to be interpreted to mean we're going to kick all Jewish people out of the region, which, to be clear, a lot of the people that use that phrase do mean that. That's why it's a bad phrase. It's not the same thing as saying Black Lives Matter, which land is not a part of that phrase.
I don't give a shit about the perspective of white right-wingers when it comes to Black Lives Matter. You can understand why I don't care about your perspective in this regard. Because if you don't understand that this is an emancipatory slogan and not one that is exterminationist, then yeah, I don't know what to tell you. What people mean when they say Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter doesn't, again, it's what's in the phrase, dude. Saying the thing is, like, saying Black Lives Matter doesn't insinuate that other lives don't matter. It's in the phrase, bro. I don't know what to tell you. From the river to the sea,
Palestine will be free also doesn't feature from the river to the sea, we should destroy Israel and kill all the Jews. You're the one who's saying that is the secondary implication behind it.
I'm just telling you how people see it, bro.
I know, but if you were to tell me this is how white people feel about Black Lives Matter, I would say I don't care how white people feel in this regard because my business is not about explaining what.
No one has ever interpreted Black Lives Matter to mean that like black people are going to kick white people out of specific cities. Like, that's not even you know what I mean? There is no room for misinterpretation in the same way that there is with from the river to the sea. They're just two very different phrases with like very different ways of interpreting what those phrases mean. Black Lives Matter is totally anodyne. completely anodyne. The worst way you can misinterpret it is to say that, oh, does that mean that white lives don't matter? But that's a nonsensical reaction to that phrase, because the phrase it's not saying that. But that's the worst way that phrase could possibly be used, and it's not even used that way. However, some people, in fact, a lot of people, when they say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, they do mean expelling all the Israeli Jews that live in that region and then usurping like the entire territory under one Palestinian state. There are some people who, when they say that phrase, that's what they mean.
There's nothing in Black Lives Matter that's saying that white lives don't matter in the fucking
There's nothing
slogan.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free that implies Jewish people must be eradicated or Israel must be destroyed and Jewish people in it must be killed.
A lot of people disagree because you're talking about from the river to the sea.
Yes, a lot of people who are not Palestinian.
When you say from the river to the sea, you mean the entire region, Greater Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, the whole region. So you can reasonably infer that somebody could mean like the end of the state of Israel. In fact, Hasan knows that a lot of people mean that when they say it. He knows this.
Palestinian, and a lot of people who are not anti-Zionists disagree. Anti-Zionists, on the other hand, don't agree, and they are the ones who are using the slogan. So why would I'm asking you, if I'm not going to ask a white person who is against Black Lives Matter, why would what they feel about this slogan? Why would I go to in the broadest majority Zionists, both Jewish and Christian? Why would I ask them what they think about a anti-Zionist slogan?
I already explained it, but you don't want to hear me.
This is why people were saying, "Hey, Ethan, you're racist. Hey, Ethan, you're a Zionist."
Yeah, and it was stupid. Ethan was relaying a perfectly valid concern that people have. I spoke with a Jewish person, I don't know, like a year ago, who I'm pretty sure they were very pro-Palestinian. And when I asked him about that phrase, he said, yeah, I don't love that phrase because I don't know how to take it. Like when you say it, I don't know exactly what you mean when you say that, which is the point. Like there's enough room for interpretation of something much, much worse than, I mean, surely, yes, some people can naively think that from the river to the sea means that everybody that lives in that region, Greater Israel, West Bank, Gaza, they can all live in under one state democratically, and there can be peaceful coexistence. Like you can find examples of some very naive, probably like young people that are claiming that this can be a thing that happens, but you can also find probably more people who mean, no, we're going to take over the country and it's going to be the end of the state of Israel. But the fact that there's room for misinterpretation highlights Ethan's point, which is like that phrase is imprecise enough to be problematic.
Do you feel like it is inappropriate for people to assume that he is a Zionist in this very moment? Is it because of the Jew hatred that is in the heart of every single one of my chatters that caused them to think that his resistance and his lack of interest in understanding the argument that I'm making
Ethan didn't say any of this.
Came across like he was still very much defensively posturing at the behest of Israel? No, I'm asking you. Like,
it's not in the slogan itself says people interpret it as destruction of Israel. I know it doesn't say let's destroy Israel,
but it's not.
But that's from the river to the sea is mainland Israel.
Okay, Ethan.
That's it, man. That's how people see it.
No, you can't simply say that's how people see it. And
what do you mean? What do you mean? Of course you can. That's how people see it, and that's how some people say it. Like, would he even deny this? Ethan?
No.
Where's that one animated thing? Somebody made an animated thing that was pretty good.
You f***ing moron! You racist piece of shit! Ethan.
Yes, sir.
Ethan. Watch it. Take a deep breath.
Uh-oh, chair react.
That we have.
I'm not going to let you chair react to me, buddy. You grab that Dr. Pepper. I'll wait.
No, I said I'm listening to you. Don't worry. I was just grabbing another soda. Go ahead.
Are you not embarrassed by this armpit hair? It's so cringy, bro. It's like so weird.
What? Please, for your own mental sanity, stop trying to do this. I'm pro-terrorism, Ethan. Violence is inevitable, Ethan. You f***ing moron! You racist piece of shit! Oh my God. Maybe I will watch the context puke.
Hey.
Remember, this slogan has been used to censure Rashida Tlaib. This emancipatory slogan has gotten people to be fired like Mark Lamont Hill. There is a reason why I won't back away from defending this slogan and saying this slogan.
Okay.
It was so disingenuous.
That's fine if you want to take that position, but it puts you at odds with, people like Ethan, right? Like,
to use Norm Finkelstein. It was so disingenuous of him to use Norm Finkelstein and his assessment of the slogan when Norm Finkelstein would never in a million years sit there and be like, well, my feelings are more important here than Palestinian emancipation.
No, in fact, I mean, we've all watched that speech of Norm Finkelstein. I mean, have we watched that? Have you guys watched it? It's an amazing clip. I think I've showed you guys this clip before. Whatever, I'm not going to show it to you. He explains why using the slogan is bad is because of the imprecise nature of the slogan, because some people do mean like, in the state of Israel, that it hurts the movement. It's the same thing. It's the same kind of logic for like defund the police. I mean, in a different kind of application, obviously. But the reason why defund the police was such a silly, stupid, counterproductive phrase is because nobody knows what that means. What do you mean defund the police? You mean like get rid of the police? Are we talking about abolishing the police? There's like so many different horrible ways that you can, I mean, and very few people, to be clear. I mean, you can find some people that think that we should abolish police, but that's like, we're talking like 1% of the population, right? But it was so nebulous that it was just bad strategy. And that's what Finkelstein was saying. It's bad strategy to use that slogan because it can be interpreted to mean, get rid of Israel.
Chatters who are watching this right now, 16 months into this side, if you felt like Ethan was unjustly maligned, do you feel like your opinion has changed now in terms of why people saw this argument? Which is an argument that he still tried to present to me 16 months into a side when we had a conversation this past Friday. Do you feel like this is reasonable for people to assume he is Zionist? Norm has said that. No, Norm said that he doesn't approve of it because it comes across as something that Jews fear, not even Zionists fear, but he totally gets it and totally understands it. I only started watching you.
I mean, now I have to pull the clip up.
One has to exercise not in a conservative sense, but in a radical sense. One has to exercise in a moment like this, if for no other reason than for the people of Gaza. One has to exercise maximum responsibility. Maximum responsibility to get out of one's navel, to crawl out of one's ego, and to always keep in mind the question, what are we trying to accomplish at this particular moment? That's my view.
He is saying it is irresponsible language to use from the river to the sea because it hurts their movement. That's what he's saying. That's what he's saying. He's saying, put your ego aside. Don't stubbornly cling to something because you feel like it's righteous. Consider the needs of the movement, the larger movement, and realize that by using that phrase, you're potentially hurting your advocacy for Palestinians. That's what he said.
I tried to use a perfectly coherent narrative that Ethan should understand here. Okay? Which is something that he gets. He gets that Black Lives Matter, gets a lot of flack. He's in support of Black Lives Matter. Who cares? Who cares what racist white people think about Black Lives Matter? Just like, who cares about what people who want to defend Israel feel about from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. It was just critiquing Norm was critiquing the use of the phrase, not its inherent meaning, but it doesn't matter. Norm also doesn't give a shit about that phrase.
Well, I mean, he very clearly did, but
anyway,
okay.
Now that you know the context of where he drew this,
he very clearly did, but okay.
What is Ethan's complaint on this one? I wonder. Ethan is a left-wing grifter Zionist. Fuck his content.
Zionist, baby killing.
Bro, nothing is wrong with this. Yeah, this is W. Am I wrong? He's not wrong. Unrelated buying a hang glider. Like this is edgy shit. Okay, that right there is 100% people being edgy as that.
Really? You're going to hand wave that as people being edgy? What if he went in, what do you think his response would be if he went into Ethan's subreddit and Ethan's subreddit were making jokes about the like dead Palestinians? Would he be like, oh, that's Ethan's community just being edgy? Or would he call them genocidal maniacs? Like it's a blatant double standard. Like, this is ridiculous.
Is fair. He didn't even bring that up, by the way. He's just talking about
Genocider. Maybe it is unreasonable that I'm asking
because you're racist. Is this guy not spitting? What the fuck?
him to moderate his chat for a friend. He doesn't even know where I'm coming from because it's
They are settlers, you stupid.
not something
They
he
really
would
should stop aid to Israel. He's going full goblin over Zionism. Nothing
Never asked
controversial
for.
has
And all
been
these other-
said so far. Like the only
Nothing controversial has been said so far. As soon as you get past saying I'm going to buy a hang glider, after that, nothing controversial.
The only thing he cares about is his own personal feelings. There is no moment where he tries to understand my position here. There's no moment where he tries to understand why people have this attitude.
Excuse me. If I'm doing a podcast with somebody and then a member of like my ethnic group, you know, are targeted for the largest act of terrorism ever in that country, and, you know, terrorists flew in on paragliders and murdered hundreds of like my people, and then I went to my co-host's Discord and I saw somebody joking about buying a hand glider, I would say something. I would be like, hey, can you do a little bit more moderating? Because when I see that, it creeps me out, because it seems like your people are like celebrating the death of Israeli civilians.
And if that's the most up shit you saw in a open to everyone Discord, holy moly, dude.
It actually wasn't, but I don't know how much of a documentary like paper trail we have, because he had to nuke the Discord, you guys. He had to nuke everything on the Discord because there was so much insane shit in that Discord. Why else did he nuke it? Why did he nuke it? And he's sitting here saying, like, if that's the worst thing that you can find, well, why'd you nuke it then?
Dude, you are out of your mind. Yes, nobody cares about your feelings, Ethan. I'm sorry. I don't give a about your feelings. Can you imagine?
I mean, listen, I'd venture a guess. I'd say that's probably the reason that you guys aren't friends anymore. Yes, it's pretty obvious that you didn't care about his feelings, right? Like, you've made that very glaringly obvious. But, you know, if I'm friends with somebody and I bring up concerns with that person, and then they turn around and they tell me, I don't care about your feelings, I'd be like, cool, I don't think we can be friends anymore. Go with God. You know, it's kind of like a logical endpoint there.
If I spent the past 16 months constantly talking about my own personal feelings, like I'm talking about, that are in plastic bags being carried over to medical facilities by their crying fathers after being lasered out of the sky with Israeli munitions that we shipped over to them. And I just sit there and I say, you know what? My feelings are so important here, and we really need to take time.
This is pretty unbelievable, because Hasan is one of the most sensitive streamers on the entire platform.
What the man? What the Of course your feelings don't matter in this process. What do you mean? Especially when I am, at this moment, back then, as his friend and podcast co-host, trying to explain to him
that his feelings don't matter. This is amazing, dude. I was sitting there as his friend, trying to do him a favor by reminding him that his feelings don't matter. As a friend, obviously, I was trying to get him to see that his feelings and his experience don't matter. As a friend, of course. Obviously, from the perspective of a friend. All friends do that.